In a world where faith is increasingly questioned and the future uncertain, the papacy stands as both a beacon of hope and a symbol of enduring power. What will become of the Church's influence as it faces the most significant challenges of modern times? And how will its legacy evolve in the years ahead? In the tumultuous landscape of the Roman Empire, a new faith began to take root. Christianity emerged from the teachings of a humble carpenter from Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth, whose messages of love, salvation, and forgiveness resonated with many. After his crucifixion and resurrection, his followers began to spread his teachings across the Mediterranean, sparking the birth of what would become one of the world's most influential religions. Among these followers was St. Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. His role would become foundational to the future of the Church, as he would be considered the first pope, the beginning of an unbroken line of spiritual authority that continues to this day. As Christianity spread, it faced persecution from the Roman Empire. But despite these harsh conditions, the early Christian community began to grow. Cities like Antioch and Rome became pivotal centers for this emerging faith. It was in Rome where the idea of a central authority began to crystallize. St. Peter, who had been an outspoken leader of the early Christians, found himself in a unique position. According to tradition, he traveled to Rome to spread the gospel and eventually became the bishop of the city. The authority he wielded was not only spiritual, but also rooted in his proximity to Christ. As one of the original 12 apostles, Peter's leadership was seen as divinely sanctioned, and his role in establishing the Christian community in Rome laid the groundwork for the papacy. The concept of apostolic succession emerged during this time, solidifying the belief that the authority of the apostles, passed down through generations, was essential for maintaining the purity of the Christian faith. St. Peter, as the leader of the apostles, was considered the foundational stone upon which the Church would be built. His role as the Bishop of Rome, coupled with the belief that he was chosen by Christ to lead his followers, gave him unprecedented authority in the Christian community. This authority would be passed down to his successors, beginning with Pope Linus, creating an unbroken chain of spiritual leadership that would become the hallmark of the papacy. As the centuries unfolded, the papacy's role within the Christian world would evolve, but the foundations laid by St. Peter remained firmly in place. His legacy as the first pope and the spiritual authority derived from apostolic succession established the papacy as not only a religious institution, but also a significant political power, shaping the history of Europe and the world for centuries to come. The story of Peter's rise to papacy and the subsequent development of the Church would become one of the most fascinating and complex narratives in history. After St. Peter's death, the mantle of leadership in the Christian Church passed to those who would succeed him as bishops of Rome. The first popes were entrusted not only with spiritual guidance, but also with the monumental task of expanding Christianity across a vast and often hostile Roman Empire. These early popes faced challenges that would test their resolve and shape the future of the Church. In the years following Peter's martyrdom, the Christian community in Rome and beyond was still very much in its infancy. The early popes, including Pope Linus, Pope Cletus, and Pope Anacletus, were primarily concerned with maintaining the unity of the Church and ensuring that the teachings of Jesus remained unaltered. These first pontiffs were also instrumental in organizing the growing Christian communities, establishing rules and practices that would later become central to Christian worship. However, their authority was constantly challenged by both internal and external forces. Externally, the Church was still viewed as a sect of Judaism, which initially allowed some degree of tolerance. However, as Christianity spread, it faced increasing opposition from the Roman Empire, particularly as Christians refused to worship the Roman gods or acknowledge the emperor as a divine figure. Persecution became widespread under emperors such as Nero, who notoriously blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome in 64 AD. The popes during this period were not only leaders of faith but also figures of endurance, as they had to navigate these difficult times while maintaining the survival of their faith. Despite the persecution, Christianity continued to spread through covert meetings and by reaching the marginalized, thus fostering a deeply loyal community that endured the trials. The early church also began to develop a structure during these years. As Christianity spread, more local communities were established, and the need for organization became evident. While the papacy remained the central authority, regional bishops began to take on more defined roles in their respective areas. This laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a more formal hierarchy, with the Pope at the head, bishops overseeing regions, and priests serving individual congregations. This structure would help to sustain the unity of the Church in the face of increasing political and theological divisions that would arise in later centuries. Despite the hardships they faced, these first popes set the stage for the expansion of Christianity across the Roman Empire and beyond. Their leadership ensured the survival of the early Christian Church, establishing a foundation of faith, authority, and governance that would remain a central feature of the papacy for centuries. Their perseverance and devotion would eventually lead to the Church's acceptance and growth, culminating in Christianity becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire by the time of Emperor Constantine's reign. The first popes may have been small in number, but their legacy would shape the destiny of the Church and its impact on history forever. In the early 4th century, the Roman Empire was a melting pot of diverse religions and ideologies, but none were as contentious or as transformative as Christianity. The religion, once persecuted by the empire, would soon find itself embraced at the highest levels of power. The key moment in this seismic shift came with the conversion of Emperor Constantine, whose personal belief and political vision would change the trajectory of both the Roman Empire and the Christian Church forever. Constantine's conversion to Christianity is a story of legend and faith. In 312 AD, as he prepared for a critical battle for control of the empire, he saw a vision of a Christian cross in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In this sign, you will conquer." Believing this divine message, Constantine adopted the Christian symbol and went on to defeat his rival, Maxentius, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. This victory not only secured his reign, but also marked the beginning of his favourable stance toward Christianity. The following year, in 313 AD, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, which granted religious tolerance to all religions within the empire, effectively ending the persecution of Christians. For the first time in Roman history, Christianity was no longer a criminalized faith, but one that was recognized and protected by imperial law. This monumental act of legalization allowed Christianity to flourish without fear of repression, as it began to receive state sponsorship and imperial patronage. Constantine, who had become a devout Christian, also undertook the construction of grand churches and provided generous resources to the Christian community, including the famed Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, built on the site of Christ's tomb. As Constantine embraced Christianity, the religion's status within the empire also shifted. Christianity, which had once been marginalized, began to take on the prestige and influence of an official state religion. This marked the beginning of what would later be known as the Byzantine period, where Christianity became not only the spiritual foundation of the empire, but also its political backbone. Constantine himself was deeply involved in ecclesiastical matters, presiding over the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which sought to unify Christian doctrine and resolve theological disputes. His support of the Church was essential in shaping Christian orthodoxy and institutional power. The papacy, which had steadily grown in importance in the centuries prior, found itself with new opportunities and responsibilities in this era of imperial support. While Constantine himself did not bestow direct authority on the papacy, the growing legal recognition of Christianity naturally led to a greater centralization of the Christian faith. The Bishop of Rome, who would come to be known as the Pope, increasingly became a key figure, not just in matters of faith, but in the political and social structure of the empire. As the papacy gained influence, it also began to interact with the imperial authorities in ways that would ultimately secure its place at the helm of Christendom, forging a legacy that would shape the future of Europe for centuries to come. Constantine's conversion and the subsequent rise of Christianity as the state religion marked a pivotal moment in both Roman and Christian history. The papacy, once a humble and persecuted community, was now stepping into a position of power and influence within the heart of the empire, setting the stage for the Church's role in shaping Western civilization. The collapse of the Roman Empire in the 5th century was a catastrophe that shook the foundations of the Western world. Once a sprawling, mighty empire, Rome had become increasingly vulnerable to internal corruption, external invasions, and economic decay. In 476 AD, the final blow came when the last Roman emperor in the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. With the fall of Rome, the centralized political structure that had held the empire together disintegrated, and Europe plunged into an era of instability and fragmentation known as the Dark Ages. Amid this chaos, the papacy began to emerge as the central spiritual and political authority in the West. As the empire crumbled, the Christian Church, particularly the Bishop of Rome, became a unifying force for the disparate peoples of Europe. The papacy, under the leadership of Pope Gregory I and his successors, gradually assumed not only religious, but also political roles that helped preserve some semblance of order in a fractured world. The Church provided a source of stability and continuity during a time when local rulers and warlords fought for control of the former Roman territories. Pope Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great, was instrumental in solidifying the papacy's political and spiritual power. His reforms expanded the Church's influence, helping to integrate the newly formed barbarian kingdoms into the Christian world. Gregory worked tirelessly to assert papal authority over the Church's internal affairs, establishing the papacy as the undisputed leader of Christendom. He also sent missionaries, such as St. Augustine of Canterbury, to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Britain, helping to spread Christianity and papal influence far beyond the Italian peninsula. The fall of Rome ushered in a period of cultural decline, but the Church's role in preserving knowledge and education would prove to be vital. While the Roman Empire's grand libraries and intellectual achievements were lost to time, the monastic orders, particularly the Benedictines, kept learning alive in their monasteries. Monks and nuns diligently copied ancient manuscripts, preserving classical texts and Christian writings that would later spark the intellectual revival of the Middle Ages. The monasteries became centers of learning, where scholars and scribes kept the flame of education burning during centuries when much of Europe languished in ignorance. As the Dark Ages unfolded, the Church's role extended far beyond mere religious duties. It became the cornerstone of civilization in the West, offering not only spiritual guidance, but also a means of organizing society. The papacy provided the necessary infrastructure for a rudimentary form of government, serving as an intermediary between the fractured kingdoms of Europe and offering a semblance of unity. The Church became a beacon of stability, its influence reaching into every aspect of life, from politics to culture, ensuring that the remnants of the ancient world were preserved for future generations. In a time when Europe seemed to be regressing into barbarism, the Church stood as the last institution to hold the light of civilization aloft. As the centuries passed, the papacy, once a beacon of stability and spiritual authority, found itself embroiled in power struggles that would define the Dark Ages. The collapse of the Roman Empire had left a vacuum of political power, and the Church stepped in to fill that void. However, as Christianity spread across Europe, The papacy's authority began to clash with the ambitions of kings and emperors. Kings sought to assert their control over the church, viewing it as a tool to solidify their own political power. The papacy, on the other hand, saw itself as the supreme authority, not just in religious matters but in secular ones as well, claiming the divine right to guide the rulers of nations. This constant tension between papal power and royal ambition led to several heated confrontations throughout the Middle Ages, culminating in the investiture controversy of the 11th century. The rise of feudalism further complicated the papacy's role. As the European landscape became fragmented into numerous small territories, the church became a significant landholder, controlling vast swaths of land across Europe. This territorial control, gained through donations from monarchs and nobility, turned the papacy into a powerful political entity in its own right. The church's lands, like any feudal lords, required protection and management, and so the papacy engaged in the same political maneuvering as any other feudal entity. Popes made alliances with kings, waged wars, and held court over their subjects. While the church's spiritual mission remained at the forefront of its agenda, the political power it wielded was undeniable, and the papacy became a central player in the geopolitics of medieval Europe. Yet, with this immense power came its own set of challenges. The papacy, once revered for its moral and spiritual leadership, began to suffer from internal corruption. The very riches that flowed into the Vatican through tithes, donations, and landholdings became a source of scandal. Popes and cardinals indulged in opulence, living in luxury while the common people toiled in poverty. Nepotism was rampant, with papal positions often being handed out to family members and friends. The infamous sale of indulgences, which allowed the wealthy to buy their way into heaven, epitomized the moral decay that had infiltrated the church. This exploitation of faith for financial gain deeply tarnished the papacy's reputation and led to widespread disillusionment among the faithful. The scandals that rocked the papacy in the Dark Ages were not just confined to financial mismanagement. Throughout this period, numerous popes were embroiled in political intrigue, power struggles, and even violence. The papal office was sometimes occupied by individuals with questionable morals who sought to use the position for personal gain rather than spiritual guidance. The Borgia papacy, in particular, became infamous for its corruption, with Pope Alexander VI being accused of bribery, nepotism, and even murder. These scandals not only undermined the credibility of the church, but also fueled the growing calls for reform from within and outside the institution. The church's power, once unchallenged, was now in crisis, struggling to maintain its authority in the face of both internal decay and external pressure. In 1054, a monumental event forever altered the course of Christian history: the Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. What had been a slow-building divide, marked by theological differences, political struggles, and cultural divergence, reached its breaking point in this year. The split was not a singular event, but the culmination of centuries of tension that had been brewing between the Eastern and Western branches of Christianity. The papacy, which had long exerted its influence over the Western half of the Christian world, found itself at odds with the Eastern Church. Centered in Constantinople, theological disagreements played a significant role in the schism, but they were hardly the only causes. One of the most contentious issues was the role of the Pope. The Roman Catholic Church upheld the papacy as the supreme authority, asserting that the Pope, as the successor to St. Peter, held a unique position of power over all Christians. In contrast, the Eastern Orthodox Church rejected papal supremacy, arguing that the authority of the Church should be decentralized, with equal influence granted to the patriarchs of the major Eastern cities, including Constantinople. The Pope's claim to universal authority was one of the most provocative points of contention, leading to a deepening rift. Theological disputes also played a critical role in the divide. One of the most famous disagreements between the two branches was over the Filioque controversy. This theological debate centered on the phrase, "and the Son," in the Nicene Creed, which the Western Church added to the part about the Holy Spirit's origin. The Eastern Orthodox Church objected, arguing that this alteration violated the original intent of the Creed and infringed on the primacy of the Father within the Holy Trinity. Political and cultural factors further exacerbated the rift. The Byzantine Empire, which represented Eastern Christianity, had its own set of challenges and ambitions. The papacy, meanwhile, was growing in both temporal and spiritual power, increasingly asserting its influence across Europe. As the power of the popes grew, so too did the tension between Rome and Constantinople, especially as the Eastern Church struggled to maintain its autonomy and influence. The final catalyst came in 1054, when mutual excommunications were issued by the Pope and the Patriarch of Constantinople, officially marking the separation of the two churches. The long-term impact of the schism on the papacy was profound. The Pope's authority was no longer recognized in the Eastern Christian world, and the Roman Catholic Church lost a significant portion of Christendom. The split would shape the future of Christianity, creating two distinct branches, each with its own understanding of authority, theology, and governance. For the papacy, the schism meant a loss of political influence in the East, where the patriarchs of Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria would maintain their own distinct paths. The Catholic Church, while maintaining its dominance in the West, would have to navigate a new reality where its authority was contested, and its claims to universal jurisdiction were no longer unchallenged. The division that began in 1054 would persist for centuries, defining the trajectory of both the Catholic and Orthodox churches. In the centuries following the Great Schism of 1054, the papacy underwent a significant transformation, asserting not only spiritual dominance but also political power. The rise of the Papal States, a vast territorial entity in central Italy, marked a new chapter in the history of the Church. The process by which the papacy became a temporal ruler in Italy was gradual, shaped by a complex web of religious, political, and military maneuvers that spanned centuries. The seeds of the Papal States were sown as early as the 8th century, when Pope Stephen II sought the protection of the Frankish king, Pepin the Short, in exchange for military aid against the Lombards, who threatened the papal territories. Pepin granted the Pope a large swath of land in central Italy. This donation, known as the Donation of Pepin, established the foundation for the Papal States, marking the beginning of the papacy's territorial expansion. It was a symbolic gesture, tying the Pope not just to the Church's spiritual authority, but to the politics of Europe as well. Over the next few centuries, the papacy's control over the Papal States expanded. As the political landscape in Italy became fragmented and unstable, successive popes seized the opportunity to strengthen their rule over a patchwork of territories. They took advantage of the ongoing conflicts between powerful local rulers, using both diplomacy and military force to acquire land. By the 12th century, the papacy had become a major political force in Italy, with the Pope not only wielding spiritual authority, but also exercising temporal power over a large area of the Italian peninsula. The acquisition of territory wasn't just a matter of military conquest. It was a deeply political process as well. The papacy used its influence over European monarchs to secure its position, making strategic alliances with kings and emperors. Popes could now dictate terms in the courts of kings and demand loyalty from regional rulers, all while maintaining their divine authority. They presented themselves as protectors of Christendom, a mantle that justified their military interventions and territorial acquisitions. The influence of the Church in the daily lives of the people and the authority of the Pope over both spiritual and political matters grew immensely during this period. By the 13th century, the papacy's role as a temporal ruler in Italy had been solidified. The Pope ruled over a substantial portion of central Italy, with the Papal States extending from the city of Rome to regions such as Umbria and the Romagna. As temporal rulers, popes built palaces, managed armies, and engaged in political alliances and conflicts just like any other European monarch. The papacy's political power was not without controversy. The concept of a religious figure holding such vast territorial authority raised questions about the proper balance between secular and spiritual power. Yet, despite these challenges, the papacy thrived as a temporal ruler, intertwining its spiritual role with its newfound political authority. The Papal States remained a fixture of the papacy's power for over 1,000 years, becoming a symbol of the Pope's dual role as both a spiritual leader and a temporal ruler. The rise of the Papal States transformed the papacy into a dominant force in both religious and political spheres, securing its place in European history. The investiture controversy, a pivotal struggle between Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV, marked one of the most defining moments in the history of the medieval church. This conflict, which spanned much of the late 11th century, was a battle for control over ecclesiastical appointments, a central issue in the relationship between secular and spiritual authority. At the heart of the dispute was the Pope's assertion that only the Church had the divine right to appoint bishops, while secular rulers, particularly Henry IV, believed that they should maintain control over such appointments as part of their royal prerogative. The roots of the investiture controversy lay in the growing power of the papacy and the increasing influence of the Church over European affairs. Pope Gregory VII, a staunch reformer, was determined to assert the independence of the Church from secular interference. His most significant act was to enforce the decree that only the Pope could appoint bishops, a policy that directly challenged the practices of many European monarchs, who had traditionally invested their own candidates into key ecclesiastical positions. Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, was particularly resistant to this encroachment on his authority. He saw the appointment of bishops as an extension of his own political power, vital for maintaining control over his empire and asserting his influence over the Church within his realm. The conflict came to a head in 1075, when Gregory VII issued the Dictatus Papae, a papal decree that not only asserted the Pope's right to appoint bishops, but also claimed that the Pope had the power to depose emperors. In response, Henry IV, who had been excommunicated by Gregory for his defiance, called for a council of German bishops, which declared Gregory's actions invalid. The emperor's refusal to comply with the Pope's decree set the stage for an epic clash. The most dramatic moment of the conflict occurred in 1077, when Henry IV, in an act of humility and desperation, travelled to Canossa, the Pope's stronghold, to seek forgiveness. Standing barefoot in the snow, Henry awaited Gregory's absolution, an act that demonstrated the Pope's dominance in the struggle for ecclesiastical power. Despite this public display of submission, the conflict was far from over. The emperor regained his strength and continued to challenge papal authority. The struggle continued for several more years, with both sides engaging in political maneuvering and military action. The resolution of the investiture controversy came in 1122 with the Concordat of Worms, which effectively ended the conflict by establishing a compromise. The agreement recognized that the Church would have the sole authority to appoint bishops, but it allowed the emperor to invest them with secular authority. While the papacy had won the ideological battle, securing the right to control ecclesiastical appointments, the emperor retained a degree of influence over the political aspect of these positions. The investiture controversy marked a profound shift in the balance of power between the Church and secular rulers. By securing its control over appointments, the papacy not only strengthened its authority, but also laid the groundwork for the Church's greater influence over European politics in the centuries to come. The controversy highlighted the growing distinction between spiritual and temporal powers, a tension that would continue to shape the history of the medieval world. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the papacy reached its golden age, solidifying its dominance not only as a religious institution, but also as a powerful political force in Europe. This period marked the apex of papal authority, with the papacy influencing the very fabric of European society. The leadership of popes like Innocent III shaped the course of medieval history, as they wielded immense power, dictating the actions of kings, shaping the direction of crusades, and commanding vast territories. Innocent III, one of the most powerful and influential popes, embodied the strength and authority of the papacy. His reign 1198–1216 saw the papacy become the central force in European politics, with Innocent asserting control over the most important European monarchs. He famously excommunicated King John of England, forcing him to submit to papal authority by accepting England as a papal fief. Innocent's influence also extended to the organizing of the Fourth Crusade, an ambitious, albeit controversial, military expedition that aimed to capture Jerusalem, but ultimately led to the sack of Constantinople. This event highlighted the papacy's reach and the complex relationship between spiritual and political authority in medieval Europe. In addition to his political maneuvering, Innocent III was instrumental in shaping the theological and cultural direction of the Church. Under his papacy, the Church became a powerful force in intellectual life, with the papacy commissioning theological works, supporting universities, and overseeing the development of key doctrines that would shape Christianity for centuries. The theological landscape of the period was marked by the flourishing of scholasticism, with figures like Thomas Aquinas rising to prominence. His works, supported by the papacy, merged reason with faith and left an indelible mark on Christian philosophy. During this golden age, the papacy also became a patron of the arts, architecture, and education, overseeing the construction of some of the most significant Gothic cathedrals that still stand today. The papacy's support helped nurture an artistic renaissance that manifested in stunning works of religious art, from illuminated manuscripts to grand frescoes. Architecture flourished under papal sponsorship, with the construction of iconic structures such as the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris and the beginnings of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which would later become the center of Catholicism. The papacy's golden age was a time when the spiritual authority of the Pope was virtually unchallenged in Christendom. This period solidified the papacy's position not only as a religious center, but also as a political powerhouse that shaped European history for centuries to come. The influence of the papacy during these centuries laid the foundation for the Church's dominance in the medieval period, leaving a legacy of intellectual, political, and artistic achievements that would resonate throughout the history of Western civilization. The Renaissance, a period of profound cultural and intellectual revival in Italy during the 14th to 17th centuries, was also a time when the papacy flourished, both spiritually and politically. As the center of Christianity, the Church emerged not only as a religious institution, but as a powerful patron of the arts, science, and culture. The popes of this era, especially those in Rome, played a crucial role in the flourishing of the Italian Renaissance, supporting artists, philosophers, and scholars whose work would change the course of Western civilization. Pope Julius II, often referred to as the warrior pope, exemplified this dynamic. His papacy, 1503–1513, marked a time of intense artistic patronage and political ambition. Julius understood the power of art and culture, using the Church's wealth to commission works that would both immortalize the papacy and elevate the city of Rome to unparalleled artistic heights. He enlisted some of the greatest minds of the era, including Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bramante, to transform the Vatican into a grand symbol of divine authority and human achievement. Michelangelo's commission to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, completed between 1508 and 1512, is one of the most iconic works of art in history. The ceiling's intricate frescoes, depicting biblical scenes with unprecedented grandeur and detail, not only demonstrated Michelangelo's genius, but also solidified the papacy's role as the ultimate patron of the arts. This artwork, along with other masterpieces like Raphael's frescoes in the Vatican's Raphael Rooms, brought about a cultural renaissance in Rome that resonated across Europe. The papacy's patronage was not limited to visual arts. The Church also supported advancements in philosophy, science, and theology. The Vatican became a hub for intellectuals, with popes encouraging the study of classical texts and the development of new ideas. The Renaissance saw the flourishing of humanism, a movement that emphasized the study of the classical world, and popes like Nicholas V and Sixtus IV were strong supporters of humanist scholars and the preservation of ancient texts. Under their guidance, the Vatican Library expanded, becoming one of the most important repositories of knowledge in the Western world. The Church's growing wealth and influence during this period were also integral to the Renaissance. The papacy's vast landholdings, revenues from indulgences, and political alliances with powerful families like the Medici of Florence provided the financial foundation necessary to fund the arts and sustain papal power. This wealth also fueled the architectural transformation of Rome, with the construction of grand basilicas, palaces, and gardens, including the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, which began under Pope Julius II and was later completed under Pope Leo X. In many ways, the Renaissance was a golden age for the papacy. The Church not only enjoyed a revival of spiritual and intellectual life, but also used its vast resources to shape the cultural and political landscape of Italy and beyond. The art and ideas that flourished under papal patronage continue to influence Western thought and aesthetics, marking the Renaissance as one of the most pivotal periods in the history of both the Church and human civilization. The 16th century was a period of immense upheaval for the Christian Church, as the Protestant Reformation, ignited by Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, challenged the authority of the papacy and shook the foundations of Catholicism. Luther, a German monk and theologian, became disillusioned with certain practices within the Church, most notably the sale of indulgences, which he believed undermined the true teachings of Christianity. His bold challenge, in the form of 95 propositions pinned to the door of the Wittenberg Church, questioned the Pope's authority, the role of indulgences in salvation, and the overall corruption of the clergy. Luther's actions would ultimately spark a movement that transformed the religious, social, and political landscape of Europe. The papacy's initial response to Luther's challenge was one of disbelief and condemnation. Pope Leo X, who had been involved in the construction of St. Peter's Basilica and the collection of indulgences to fund it, saw Luther's ideas as a direct threat to the Church's power and wealth. In 1520, the Pope issued a papal bull, Exsurge Domine, condemning Luther's writings and calling for his excommunication. Luther, however, refused to recant and publicly burned the papal bull, further solidifying his stance against the papacy and the Church's perceived abuses. This defiance marked the beginning of a theological and political rebellion that would fracture Christianity in Europe. As Luther's teachings gained traction, particularly among German princes and other reformers, the papacy faced a growing challenge that threatened its spiritual and political authority. The rise of Lutheranism was not just a theological dispute, but also a movement deeply intertwined with political and social upheaval. Various European rulers saw Luther's challenge as an opportunity to assert their own independence from papal control, and many embraced his ideas to strengthen their local power. This was a crucial factor in the rapid spread of Protestantism across Northern Europe, including in regions of Switzerland, Scandinavia, and England. In response to the Protestant challenge, the Catholic Church initiated its own period of reform, known as the Counter-Reformation, led by figures like Pope Paul III and the establishment of the Society of Jesus by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540. The Catholic Church sought to address some of the criticisms leveled by reformers while reaffirming its doctrinal authority. The Council of Trent, convened between 1545 and 1563, became the cornerstone of the Catholic response. It reaffirmed key Catholic doctrines such as the authority of Scripture and tradition, the importance of the sacraments, and the centrality of the Pope in church governance. It also took steps to address corruption within the clergy, such as by establishing seminaries for the proper training of priests and strengthening the role of bishops in enforcing church discipline. The papacy's response to Luther and the Protestant Reformation ultimately reshaped the Catholic Church. While the Reformation led to a permanent split in Christianity, with Protestant denominations emerging alongside Catholicism, the Counter-Reformation revitalized the Catholic Church and solidified its influence, particularly in Southern Europe. The Catholic response to Luther's challenge was not just about defending traditional teachings, but also about reasserting its moral and spiritual authority in a rapidly changing world. The struggle between Protestantism and Catholicism that began with Luther's challenge would continue to shape European history for centuries to come. The Catholic Church's response to the Protestant Reformation culminated in the creation of the Council of Trent, a landmark series of meetings that began in 1545 and lasted until 1563. The council was convened by Pope Paul III with the aim of addressing the growing challenges posed by Protestantism while also reforming certain internal practices that had become subjects of criticism. The Church found itself in the midst of a theological and political storm, with large segments of Europe embracing Lutheranism and other Protestant ideologies. The papacy's authority was being questioned, and it was clear that the Church needed to adapt if it was to maintain its spiritual and political dominance. The Council of Trent became the Church's central response to Protestantism. Its primary objective was not only to clarify Catholic teachings, but also to implement internal reforms. The council was held in several sessions over the course of nearly 2 decades, with delegates from across Europe, including cardinals, bishops, and theologians, coming together to deliberate on crucial doctrinal and ecclesiastical issues. At the heart of the council's work was the reaffirmation of Catholic doctrine, which had been challenged by the Reformation. The Council of Trent firmly upheld the authority of Scripture and tradition, rejected the Protestant notion of sola scriptura, the belief that the Bible alone is the ultimate source of authority, and reaffirmed the Church's teaching on the 7 sacraments, the role of the clergy, and the necessity of good works for salvation. Perhaps the most significant outcome of the Council was the Church's response to the issue of salvation. It reaffirmed the Catholic view that salvation is achieved through both faith and works, a direct rejection of the Protestant doctrine of sola fide, faith alone. Additionally, the Council addressed the growing dissatisfaction with the clergy and ecclesiastical corruption. The Council implemented reforms that aimed to improve the education and conduct of priests, ensuring that they were properly trained and held to higher moral standards. The creation of seminaries for the education of priests was one of the most important reforms, ensuring that clergy were more capable of serving the spiritual needs of their congregations. The strengthening of papal authority was another key outcome of the Council of Trent. In the wake of the Reformation, the Church found itself in a battle to assert its influence over both spiritual and political matters. The council affirmed the Pope's supremacy in ecclesiastical matters and reinforced the importance of the papacy as the central authority within the Catholic Church. This assertion of papal power was necessary to prevent further fragmentation and to counter the rise of Protestant denominations that rejected papal authority. In the end, the Council of Trent was a decisive moment in the history of the Catholic Church. It not only clarified Catholic doctrine in response to Protestant challenges, but also enacted reforms that helped renew the Church's credibility and influence. The Council's work laid the groundwork for the Catholic Counter-Reformation, revitalizing the Church and ensuring that it remained a dominant force in Europe for centuries to come. Its decisions shaped Catholic theology and practice, and its legacy continues to influence the Church today. The rise of the Inquisition marked one of the most controversial periods in the history of the papacy. As the Church sought to root out heresy and preserve the purity of Catholic doctrine, emerging in the early Middle Ages, the Inquisition became an institutional tool for the Catholic Church in its battle against what it perceived as false teachings and religious threats to its authority. The Inquisition, particularly during the 12th and 13th centuries, was driven by the papacy's desire to maintain doctrinal unity and suppress what it saw as dangerous deviations from accepted beliefs. Papal power played a significant role in the establishment and expansion of the Inquisition. The Church, under the guidance of successive popes, gradually institutionalized the process of investigating and prosecuting heresy. The earliest form of the Inquisition, known as the Papal Inquisition, was formally established by Pope Gregory IX in 1233. It was designed to combat the rise of various heretical movements, most notably the Cathar and Albigensian heresies, which had gained significant followings in southern France. The Inquisition's role was to identify and eliminate these perceived threats by conducting rigorous investigations, often with little regard for the rights of the accused. The papacy, which wielded both spiritual and temporal authority, saw the Inquisition as a necessary measure to preserve the unity of the faith. Its power was deeply embedded in the political landscape of medieval Europe, where the Church's influence over kings and rulers was extensive. This made the Inquisition an instrument of both spiritual control and political power, as it often worked in tandem with secular authorities to root out heretics. The process of identifying heretics, which began with the questioning of individuals suspected of holding unorthodox views, could quickly escalate into violent persecution. Those found guilty of heresy were often subjected to severe punishments, including imprisonment, excommunication, and, in extreme cases, execution by burning at the stake. The suppression of alternative religious views became central to the Inquisition's operations. Heretics, viewed as a threat not only to the Church but also to the stability of society, were seen as enemies of the established order. The Inquisition focused not only on theological disputes, but also on political and social implications of dissent. The Church aimed to eliminate any challenge to its authority, using the Inquisition as a tool to ensure conformity to Catholic doctrine. The accusations of heresy often included charges of blasphemy, witchcraft, and apostasy, with individuals accused of undermining the Church's moral and religious authority. However, the Inquisition was not without its moral and ethical controversies. The methods employed, including the use of torture to extract confessions, raised profound questions about the morality of the Church's actions. The lack of due process, the abuse of power, and the often arbitrary nature of the trials caused widespread suffering and fear. In many cases, individuals were condemned based on flimsy evidence or personal vendettas, and the inquisitor's authority was often unchecked. While the Church defended these practices as necessary to protect the faith, critics argued that the Inquisition represented an abuse of papal power, and its legacy remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Catholic Church. Despite the moral outrage surrounding the Inquisition, It was a defining period for the papacy, symbolizing both the Church's strength and its capacity for moral overreach. The Church's role in combating heresy through the Inquisition solidified its authority over religious life in medieval Europe, yet it also exposed the limits of papal power when confronted with ethical and human rights concerns. The Inquisition's impact on religious tolerance, intellectual freedom, and church-state relations would reverberate for centuries, leaving a complex legacy that continues to provoke debate and reflection. The French Revolution, which erupted in 1789, marked a profound turning point, not only for France but also for the papacy and the Catholic Church as a whole. The revolution, driven by ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, sought to dismantle the old feudal system, challenge the authority of the monarchy, and upend the powerful institutions that had long held sway over European society, including the Catholic Church. As the revolutionaries sought to reshape the political and social order, they turned their attention to the Church, seeing it as a pillar of the old regime and an obstacle to the new ideals of secularism and republicanism. One of the most immediate impacts of the French Revolution on the papacy was the confiscation of church property. The French state, in its quest to reduce the power and influence of the Church, seized vast amounts of land and wealth that had been accumulated by the clergy over centuries. Churches, monasteries, and convents were nationalized, and their assets were sold off to fund the revolution. This move stripped the Church of much of its temporal power and financial resources, severely undermining its ability to influence not only French politics, but also its authority across Europe. The French government's actions represented a direct challenge to the papacy's long-standing role as both a spiritual and temporal authority. In addition to the confiscation of property, the papacy also experienced a significant loss of temporal power. The Papal States, a vast collection of territories in central Italy that had been under papal rule for centuries, were severely weakened by the events of the Revolution. In 1798, as revolutionary fervour spread beyond France's borders, French troops marched into Rome and took control of the city. Pope Pius VI, who had already been a vocal opponent of the revolution, was captured and imprisoned by the French, marking a humiliating blow to the papacy. His imprisonment was not just a personal affront, but a direct assault on the temporal power of the Pope, as it demonstrated the vulnerability of the Church to secular forces. The Pope's imprisonment was a symbol of the broader decline of the Papal States. The French Revolution had ignited a wave of secularism across Europe, and in the wake of the Revolution, many other European nations, inspired by the French example, sought to curtail the power of the Church. The papacy, once a central political force, found itself relegated to the margins of European politics. The loss of the Papal States and the imprisonment of Pope Pius VI exposed the fragility of the papacy's temporal authority, which had long been intertwined with its spiritual mission. In the years following the Revolution, the papacy struggled to regain its lost power. Pope Pius VI died in captivity in 1799, and his successor, Pope Pius VII, faced the daunting task of restoring the Church's authority in a Europe that was increasingly hostile to papal influence. The decline of the Papal States, along with the confiscation of church property, marked a significant shift in the relationship between the Catholic Church and the secular world. The Revolution had irrevocably altered the balance of power, and the papacy, while continuing to hold spiritual authority, would never again possess the same political influence it once had. The loss of the Papal States in the 19th century, following the upheaval caused by the French Revolution and the subsequent unification of Italy, marked a profound crisis for the papacy. The papacy, once a powerful political entity with control over vast territories in central Italy, found itself stripped of its temporal authority and relegated to the Vatican, a small enclave within the city of Rome. The collapse of the Papal States left the Pope with little more than symbolic power, and for decades, the Church struggled to come to terms with its diminished status in a rapidly changing world. Pope Pius IX, who led the Church through this turbulent period, responded to the loss of the Papal States with a firm resolve to maintain the Church's spiritual authority, despite its political setbacks. The Pope famously declared the prisoner of the Vatican, refusing to leave the small Vatican enclave and rejecting the legitimacy of the new Italian government that had seized the papal territories. The papacy, in its resistance to the loss of temporal power, found itself in a long period of isolation from the political affairs of Italy and much of Europe. The situation persisted for decades, with no resolution in sight. However, the papacy's fortunes took a dramatic turn in the early 20th century, with the signing of the Lateran Treaty in 1929. This treaty, signed by Pope Pius XI and the Kingdom of Italy, under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, marked the end of the Roman question, the unresolved issue of the papacy's relationship with the newly unified Italian state. The treaty recognized the sovereignty of the Vatican City, a small, independent city-state created out of the former papal lands. In exchange, the Vatican agreed to recognize the legitimacy of the Italian state, with the Pope formally acknowledging the Kingdom of Italy and Mussolini's government. The Lateran Treaty of 1929 was a turning point for the papacy. For the first time in over half a century, the Pope regained sovereignty over a territory, albeit a small one. Vatican City became an independent state, with the Pope as its sovereign ruler. The treaty also established Catholicism as the official religion of Italy, providing the Church with significant influence in Italian politics and society. The treaty's success marked the restoration of the papacy's temporal power, albeit in a reduced and more symbolic form, but with the papacy once again positioned as a significant player on the international stage. The Lateran Treaty also represented a strategic diplomatic victory for the Vatican. It allowed the Church to retain its independence and autonomy, free from interference by the Italian state or other secular powers. The restoration of papal authority in the modern world allowed the Vatican to once again engage in diplomatic relations with other nations, ensuring its place in global affairs. It also provided a foundation for the papacy's renewed influence in the 20th century, both as a religious leader and as a key actor in international politics. With Vatican City securely established, the papacy was able to focus on its spiritual mission, while the loss of its temporal power became a distant memory, overshadowed by the revival of its authority in the modern world. The Vatican's role during the World Wars was shaped by its unique position as both a spiritual leader and a political entity, navigating the turbulent waters of global conflict. During World War I, Pope Benedict XV attempted to maintain a neutral stance, advocating for peace amid the devastation engulfing Europe. His efforts were largely focused on humanitarian aid, calling for an end to hostilities and offering the Vatican's support in facilitating diplomatic negotiations. However, despite his pleas for peace, the war raged on, and the Vatican's ability to influence the outcome remained limited, with its neutral position often criticized by both the Allies and the Central Powers. Benedict's papacy saw the rise of a more politically engaged Vatican, but his efforts to mediate peace remained largely unsuccessful in preventing the widespread destruction that followed. World War II, however, presented an even more complex and dire challenge. Pope Pius XII, who succeeded Benedict XV, faced the overwhelming task of navigating the Vatican through the global conflict. His papacy, beginning in 1939, coincided with the rise of fascism and the outbreak of the war. While Pius XII sought to maintain the Vatican's neutrality, the Church's relationship with the Axis powers, particularly Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, became a point of intense scrutiny. The Vatican's diplomacy with the Axis powers has long been a source of debate, with critics arguing that Pius XII failed to speak out more forcefully against the atrocities being committed, including the Holocaust. At the onset of the war, Pius XII sought to preserve the Vatican's independence, recognizing the precarious nature of its position between the warring powers. The Vatican maintained a diplomatic relationship with Nazi Germany, a relationship born out of the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which had established the Vatican's sovereignty. This diplomatic stance was seen as pragmatic, but it also drew sharp criticism in light of the Nazi regime's increasingly brutal treatment of Jews and other minorities. The question of whether Pius XII did enough to oppose Nazi atrocities remains a contentious issue. While the Vatican provided asylum to thousands of refugees, including Jews, during the war, the Pope's public silence on the scale of the Holocaust has been widely debated. Some argue that Pius XII's actions were motivated by a desire to protect the Church's position in a time of crisis, while others believe he could have done more to speak out against the Nazis' genocide. Pius XII's cautious approach during World War II was a balancing act, as he tried to safeguard the interests of the Church, while also protecting the Vatican from becoming embroiled in the conflict. His failure to openly condemn the actions of Nazi Germany, however, led to accusations of complicity, tarnishing his legacy in the eyes of many. The Vatican's role during the war would continue to be scrutinized for years to come, with the Church's response to the Holocaust and its relationship with the Axis powers remaining an enduring and controversial chapter in papal history. The Second Vatican Council, convened in 1962 by Pope John XXIII, marked a historic turning point for the Catholic Church as it sought to modernize its practices, theology, and relationship with the wider world. For centuries, the Church had maintained a hierarchical and traditional approach, but the Council was a response to the rapidly changing social, political, and cultural landscape of the 20th century. Pope John XXIII, known for his open and pastoral style, believed that the Church needed to engage more directly with the modern world, bridging the gap between tradition and progress. He called for a new Pentecost, a spiritual renewal that would allow the Church to better communicate its message in a world increasingly shaped by secularism and pluralism. The Council brought together bishops from around the world, representing a wide array of perspectives, to address critical issues affecting the Church's future. The documents produced by the Council were groundbreaking, touching on a range of topics from liturgical reform to interfaith relations, all aimed at reshaping the Church's engagement with contemporary society. One of the most significant changes was the revision of the liturgy. Prior to Vatican II, the Mass was celebrated in Latin, a language that most congregants did not understand. The Council allowed for the use of vernacular languages in the liturgy, enabling people to engage more deeply with the prayers and readings. This shift in liturgical practice reflected the broader desire to make the Church more accessible to its followers, creating a more inclusive environment where the faithful could participate more fully in the liturgical life. Another central achievement of the Council was the transformation of the Church's approach to theology. Vatican II emphasized the importance of Scripture as the foundation of Christian life, encouraging Catholics to engage with the Bible in a way that had previously been reserved for clergy and scholars. The Church recognized that the modern world required a more pastoral approach, one that emphasized dialogue and understanding rather than rigid doctrinal lines. The Council's Lumen Gentium document, which articulated the nature of the Church, introduced the idea of the Church as the people of God, rather than solely as the hierarchical institution led by the Pope. This shift in emphasis on the role of the laity and the sense of collective responsibility for the Church's mission was revolutionary. Vatican II also made significant strides in improving the Church's relationships with other faiths. The Council formally repudiated the concept of the Church's absolute superiority over other religions. As expressed in the document Nostra Aetate, this groundbreaking declaration recognized the shared spiritual values among different religious traditions, most notably in its acknowledgement of Judaism's foundational role in Christianity. The Catholic Church also made strides in fostering dialogue with Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists, promoting mutual respect and understanding. This was a dramatic departure from previous teachings, which had emphasized a more exclusive and confrontational relationship with non-Christian religions. The reforms introduced by Pope John XXIII and his successor, Pope Paul VI, had a lasting impact on the Church, modernizing its structures and outlook. Vatican II helped to redefine the Catholic Church's relationship with the modern world, making it more open, accessible, and engaged in dialogue with both its followers and the broader society. Though the changes were met with resistance by some traditionalists, they have ultimately shaped the Church into a more inclusive institution, one that continues to evolve in response to the challenges of a rapidly changing world. Throughout the 20th century, the papacy continued to wield significant influence in global politics, navigating a complex web of international tensions and ideological battles. The Church, with its global reach and moral authority, played a central role in shaping discussions about peace, justice, and human dignity. While remaining steadfast in its spiritual mission, the papacy also found itself deeply involved in political issues, particularly in the context of the Cold War, communism, and the rise of liberation theology. One of the most notable aspects of papal involvement in global politics during this period was its stance on communism. Following the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Catholic Church increasingly viewed communism as a direct threat to its teachings and institutions, particularly because of its atheistic foundations and its rejection of private property. Throughout much of the 20th century, the papacy was a vocal opponent of communism, viewing it as a force that sought to undermine the traditional values of faith, family, and personal freedom. Popes such as Pius XI and Pius XII were outspoken in their condemnation of Soviet Russia and communist ideologies, calling for a united front to resist the spread of communism, especially in Europe and Latin America. This stance on communism aligned the Vatican with Western powers, particularly the United States, during the height of the Cold War. However, the papacy's political engagement was not limited to opposition to communism. In the 1960s and 1970s, the rise of liberation theology in Latin America created a new challenge for the Church. Liberation theology, which emphasized social justice, the rights of the poor, and the need for the Church to take a more active role in political activism, was seen by some as a radical departure from traditional Catholic teachings. Pope John Paul II, who was elected in 1978, played a crucial role in addressing this issue, particularly as liberation theology became intertwined with Marxist ideas in parts of the world. John Paul II, himself from Poland, understood the importance of fighting for social justice, but was also wary of the potential for the theology to be co-opted by political ideologies that undermined Christian values. In his approach, the Pope sought a balance between promoting justice and peace, while maintaining a commitment to non-violence and respect for human dignity. The Vatican's efforts to address the concerns of liberation theologians while also rejecting the Marxist elements of the movement showcased its ability to navigate the complexities of global politics and faith. The papacy also played a key role in the broader political landscape during the Cold War, particularly in its efforts to mediate conflicts and promote peace. Pope John Paul II was instrumental in fostering dialogue between the Eastern Bloc and Western powers, using his moral authority to encourage reconciliation and reduce tensions. His role in supporting the Solidarity movement in his native Poland, which helped bring about the end of communist rule in Eastern Europe, exemplified the Vatican's influence in the collapse of Soviet communism. John Paul II's diplomatic efforts were widely recognized, and his ability to bridge ideological divides made him an important player in global politics. In addition to his political involvement, the papacy's influence extended into international affairs through its position on various global issues, including human rights, the arms race, and the promotion of peace. Through its diplomatic corps and global networks, the Vatican remained a voice for moral responsibility in political decision-making, emphasizing the need for dialogue, mutual respect, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. The political influence of the papacy in the 20th century, shaped by leaders like Pope Pius XII, John Paul II, and others, helped to direct the course of global events, offering moral guidance and promoting a vision of peace, justice, and solidarity in an increasingly polarized world. The Catholic Church has long maintained a central role in advocating for social justice and human rights, responding to the needs of the marginalized, oppressed, and disenfranchised. From its earliest days, the Church's teachings have emphasized the dignity of every human being, the sanctity of life, and the importance of caring for the poor and vulnerable. Over the centuries, the papacy has been a voice calling for a more just and equitable world, actively addressing issues like poverty, inequality, and the rights of workers, particularly during times of political, economic, and social turmoil. In the 20th century, the papacy, under leaders like Pope John Paul II, became a staunch advocate for human dignity and workers' rights. John Paul II, with his background in the labor movement in Poland, understood firsthand the struggles of the working class. His papacy marked a shift toward a more active stance on social issues, as he highlighted the importance of labor rights and the protection of workers from exploitation. His 1981 encyclical, Laborem Exercens, addressed the rights of workers and the value of work, asserting that work is not just a means to economic ends, but a vital part of human dignity. John Paul II's stance was particularly significant in the context of the rise of industrialization, which often led to the exploitation of workers in inhumane conditions. His teachings urged governments, businesses, and society to recognize the rights of workers to fair wages, safe working conditions, and the ability to organize. Beyond the rights of workers, the papacy has consistently spoken out against poverty and economic inequality, particularly in the face of globalization and its effects on the world's poor. Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis have all addressed issues of economic justice, with the latter continuing to speak forcefully against the growing disparity between rich and poor. Pope Francis, in particular, has made social justice a key aspect of his papacy, drawing attention to the plight of the poor, the dispossessed, and the marginalized. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si called for action to address both the environmental crisis and the social inequalities exacerbated by it, highlighting how the poor are often the most affected by environmental degradation. The Pope urged for a culture of care, emphasizing the responsibility of all people, particularly the wealthy, to help lift others from poverty and support sustainable economic models that do not harm the planet. The Vatican's response to global economic inequalities has been one of both advocacy and action. The papacy has frequently called for systemic changes that address the root causes of poverty, including issues such as debt, trade, and unequal access to resources. In recent decades, the Vatican has taken a more active role in advocating for fair trade practices and debt relief for the world's poorest countries. It has also supported the establishment of global social programs that aim to reduce poverty and promote human development. The Church's emphasis on social justice extends beyond just economics, including support for the protection of refugees, the rights of indigenous people, and global healthcare initiatives. Through its many encyclicals, speeches, and initiatives, the papacy continues to push for a world where economic policies and societal structures reflect the values of solidarity, justice, and the common good. The papacy's ongoing commitment to social justice and human rights ensures that the Catholic Church remains a significant force for advocating change and addressing the world's most pressing inequalities. In the 21st century, the papacy remains a central force in the global religious landscape, though its role has evolved significantly in response to the challenges of a rapidly changing world. As the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope's influence extends far beyond matters of faith and doctrine. He is not only a spiritual leader for over 1 billion Catholics, but also a moral voice in discussions on global issues such as poverty, climate change, human rights, and international conflict. However, the papacy now faces challenges unlike those it encountered in previous centuries, particularly in the context of an increasingly secularized and pluralistic world. One of the most pressing challenges faced by the Vatican is the growing trend of secularism, particularly in the Western world. As societies have become more diverse and religious affiliations have declined, the Catholic Church's traditional authority has been questioned. In many countries, religious practice has waned, with younger generations showing a diminished interest in organized religion. This decline in religiosity presents a challenge for the papacy, as it struggles to maintain its relevance in societies where spiritual guidance is increasingly seen as a private matter rather than a collective, institutional concern. The Vatican has responded to these challenges by modernizing some aspects of its approach. Under Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and especially Pope Francis, the Church has sought to engage more directly with the modern world, embracing dialogue with other faiths, engaging in interreligious dialogue, and promoting social justice. Pope Francis, in particular, has been at the forefront of this effort, emphasizing the importance of compassion, inclusivity, and care for the planet. His message on the environment, particularly through his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, brought the papacy into the global conversation on climate change and sustainability, making the Church a key advocate for ecological responsibility. Despite its attempts to adapt, the Vatican still faces a number of hurdles in maintaining its authority and influence in the 21st century. The abuse scandals that have rocked the Church over the past few decades have led to a crisis of trust among many Catholics, particularly in the Western world. These scandals, combined with the Vatican's often slow response, have damaged the Church's reputation and created a divide between the papacy and some of its followers. Pope Francis, although widely praised for his reforms and focus on healing, has inherited a church marked by deep divisions and a tarnished image. His efforts to address these issues have been met with mixed reactions, as some feel that the Church needs to go further in its reforms. In addition to these internal challenges, the Vatican faces an increasingly hostile political environment. The rise of nationalism, religious fundamentalism, and growing political polarization in many parts of the world present a complex landscape for the papacy. In some cases, the Vatican has found itself at odds with political leaders who embrace ideologies that conflict with the Church's teachings on human dignity, the sanctity of life, and the protection of refugees. The role of the Pope as a global moral authority is often tested by these political currents, as he seeks to maintain the Church's commitment to peace, justice, and human rights in an increasingly divided world. Despite these challenges, the papacy continues to play an essential role as a global spiritual leader. The Pope is a symbol of unity for Catholics around the world, and his teachings continue to inspire millions. His influence on global issues, particularly his call for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship, ensures that the papacy remains an important voice in the ongoing conversations about the future of humanity. As the world becomes more interconnected and globalized, the role of the Pope as a moral and spiritual guide will likely continue to evolve, reflecting both the ongoing challenges and opportunities of the modern age. The Vatican, often viewed as a spiritual and religious entity, harbours a much deeper and more complex role in global politics and finance. Beneath its sacred walls, where the faithful gather to pray and reflect, lies a network of influence that extends far beyond matters of faith. The Vatican, as the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, wields significant political and financial power, often operating under a veil of secrecy that has sparked speculation and intrigue. This hidden power is both a source of its strength and a topic of constant debate, with many questioning the true extent of its influence. At the heart of the Vatican's power is its unique status as a sovereign city-state. Although it occupies a mere 44 hectares in the heart of Rome, the Vatican's political influence is vast, extending far beyond its borders through its global network of dioceses, archdioceses, and religious orders. As the centre of the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican can influence political decisions in many countries, especially those with large Catholic populations. Through papal encyclicals and speeches, the Pope can direct attention to pressing global issues such as poverty, human rights, and climate change, shaping public opinion and policy. However, it is not just the Pope's spiritual authority that carries weight. The Vatican's diplomatic reach is equally significant. With a network of embassies and diplomatic ties to nearly every nation, the Vatican often acts as a mediator in international conflicts, leveraging its neutral status to facilitate peace negotiations and broker accords between rival powers. Equally enigmatic are the Vatican's finances, which have long been a subject of speculation and secrecy. The Vatican's wealth comes from a variety of sources, including donations from the faithful, investments, and lucrative ventures such as real estate holdings, artwork, and a vast array of assets in banking institutions. Yet, the exact nature of its financial dealings has remained largely opaque. In recent years, the Vatican has come under increasing scrutiny for its financial management, particularly in relation to its involvement with the Vatican Bank, also known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, IRR. While the IRR was established to manage the assets of the Church and its charitable endeavours, its operations have been linked to numerous scandals, including money laundering and financial mismanagement. Despite efforts to reform, the Vatican's financial transparency continues to be a point of contention, with critics arguing that the lack of oversight allows for unethical practices to persist. The secrecy surrounding the Vatican's governance and financial affairs has fueled numerous conspiracy theories, ranging from its alleged control of global politics to its supposed involvement in covert financial operations. Some believe that the Vatican has long been a hidden force behind the scenes, influencing global economic decisions and manipulating world events to maintain its power. Others speculate that the Church is involved in more sinister undertakings, such as secretive dealings with powerful elites or involvement in global intelligence networks. These theories often draw on the Vatican's historic role in influencing European monarchies, its involvement in the Crusades, and its supposed control over the world's wealth through its vast network of religious institutions and assets. While much of this speculation is rooted in mistrust and conjecture, the reality is that the Vatican's influence is undeniable. Its combination of spiritual authority, political connections, and financial resources ensures that it remains a powerful force on the global stage. Whether it's through its diplomatic efforts, its control over vast resources, or its ability to shape public discourse, the Vatican's hidden power continues to shape the world in ways that are often only understood by those with access to its inner workings. The secrecy surrounding its operations only adds to its mystique, allowing it to maintain its influence while remaining an enigma to the outside world. The Vatican, with its centuries-old tradition of diplomacy, holds a unique position in global affairs, serving as both a spiritual leader and a diplomatic entity. The Holy See, which is the governing body of the Catholic Church, is recognized as a sovereign entity by international law, allowing it to play an influential role in global diplomacy. Its diplomatic reach extends far beyond the walls of Vatican City, fostering relationships with countries, international organizations, and leaders around the world. While the Vatican's primary mission is spiritual, its involvement in political matters is deeply intertwined with its religious teachings and its commitment to promoting peace, justice, and human rights. The papacy's diplomatic work is guided by the belief that the Church has a moral responsibility to be a force for good in the world. Over the centuries, the Pope has acted as a mediator in various conflicts, often using the Church's influence to negotiate peace and broker treaties. This diplomatic work has been crucial in navigating the complex relationships between different political powers, especially in regions where religious tensions run high. The Vatican's ability to maintain neutrality and independence has made it an invaluable partner in resolving disputes. Its diplomatic network, comprising ambassadors and nuncios, papal representatives, spans the globe, with the Holy See maintaining formal diplomatic relations with nearly every country. This network allows the Vatican to influence policy decisions and promote its values on issues such as human rights, the protection of the environment, and global security. In times of international conflict, the papacy has often sought to be a voice of reason and a mediator between warring parties. Pope John Paul II's role in the negotiations that led to the peaceful end of the Cold War stands as a prime example of the Vatican's diplomatic influence. His efforts to promote dialogue between the United States and the Soviet Union, along with his vocal opposition to communism, helped shape the course of history during one of the most tumultuous periods in modern times. More recently, Pope Francis has continued this tradition, calling for peace in areas of conflict like Syria, the Middle East, and Ukraine. Through his speeches, diplomatic channels, and public statements, the Pope has worked tirelessly to advocate for peace and to remind the world of the importance of diplomacy over violence. The Vatican's involvement in peace negotiations is not limited to international conflicts. It also plays a vital role in fostering peace within countries and communities. The Vatican has been involved in facilitating dialogue between opposing factions, helping to build bridges in places marked by deep divisions. It has also used its moral authority to speak out against the injustices and abuses of power that fuel conflict, whether advocating for the protection of refugees, denouncing human rights violations, or supporting the disarmament process. The Vatican's diplomatic efforts reflect its deep commitment to alleviating human suffering and fostering reconciliation. In the ever-changing landscape of global politics, the papacy's diplomacy remains an essential tool for shaping international relations. By promoting peace, justice, and the dignity of the human person, the Vatican's diplomatic role continues to be one of influence and importance on the world stage. Through its unique position as both a spiritual leader and an international entity, the Holy See maintains its relevance, reminding world leaders of the power of diplomacy in the pursuit of lasting peace. The role of women in the Catholic Church, particularly within the papacy, has been a subject of both historical significance and ongoing debate. For centuries, the Church has maintained a deeply rooted tradition of male leadership, with the Pope at the pinnacle of its hierarchy. While women have not been permitted to hold the title of Pope or be ordained as priests, their influence within the Church has evolved over time, shaping the direction of spiritual and institutional life in ways that cannot be overlooked. Historically, the Catholic Church has been a male-dominated institution, and this was reflected in its structure and leadership. The position of Pope and the priesthood in general has remained closed to women, based on the Church's interpretation of Scripture and tradition. The official doctrine teaches that only men can receive the sacrament of holy orders, which is seen as essential for priesthood and papacy. This stance has sparked significant discussions, particularly in recent decades, about the role of women in the church and whether the exclusion of women from these sacred offices is a reflection of divine will or a historical construct rooted in societal norms. However, despite these doctrinal restrictions, the role of women in the Catholic Church is far from insignificant. Women have made vital contributions to the Church in various capacities, including as theologians, scholars, and spiritual leaders. Some have dedicated their lives to religious orders, such as the Sisters of Charity, the Poor Clares, and the Sisters of Mercy, where they engage in service to the poor, education, healthcare, and advocacy for social justice. While they cannot hold the same official leadership roles as men, women have profoundly shaped the Church's mission, often working on the front lines of humanitarian efforts and leading communities in prayer and devotion. In recent years, the Church has taken steps to recognize the value of women's contributions more visibly. Women have increasingly been appointed to roles of leadership within the Vatican, though their positions are often not as publicly prominent as those of their male counterparts. Women serve as advisors to the Pope on various matters, including social issues, healthcare, and education. They also hold leadership roles within Vatican offices, handling key administrative and theological responsibilities. In 2020, Pope Francis appointed several women to high-ranking positions in the Vatican, including the first female undersecretary of the Vatican's Synod of Bishops. These moves are seen by many as a step toward greater recognition and inclusion of women in the governance of the Church, though the appointment of women to positions of true power remains limited. Despite their contributions and leadership roles, women are still excluded from the ordination of priests, and the question of whether they will ever be allowed to hold the office of Pope remains open but unresolved. However, throughout history, women have played a foundational role in the development of the papacy. Figures like St. Catherine of Siena, who advised popes during the Avignon papacy, and St. Teresa of Avila, who reformed the Carmelite order, are only a few examples of the profound influence women have had on the Church's history and spiritual direction. The evolving role of women within the Catholic Church reflects a changing understanding of gender and leadership in the modern world. While the path to full inclusion in the priesthood remains closed for women, their historical and ongoing contributions to the papacy and the broader Church community continue to shape its future in profound ways. The papacy's involvement in the Crusades is one of the most significant chapters in the history of the Catholic Church, marking a period of religious and military conflict that spanned several centuries. These campaigns, initiated by the popes, were aimed at reclaiming the Holy Land from Muslim control and expanding Christian dominion in territories that had been lost to Islam. The motivations behind these calls to arms were complex, intertwining religious fervor, political power, and the desire to exert influence over both the Christian and non-Christian world. Pope Urban II's call for the First Crusade in 1095 at the Council of Clermont is considered the starting point of the Crusades. It was a response to the appeal of Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who sought help in defending his empire from the Seljuk Turks. Urban's speech, however, took on a broader purpose, invoking the idea of a holy war to liberate Jerusalem, the city of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, from the Muslims who had held it since the 7th century. Urban's call resonated deeply with the Christian population, offering spiritual rewards, chiefly the remission of sins for those who took part in the crusade. The promise of salvation and the idea of reclaiming the sacred lands from the infidels inspired thousands to join the cause, including knights, peasants, and clergy alike. The Crusades were not only religious endeavours, but also political and military undertakings. The papacy sought to assert its authority over both the religious and secular realms, positioning itself as the ultimate arbiter of Christian affairs. By calling for the Crusades, the Pope sought to unite Christendom under his banner, asserting the Church's dominance over the European monarchies and the power of the papal state. The Crusades also offered an opportunity to redirect the violent energy of the European feudal system towards a common external enemy. This allowed the papacy to consolidate its power, while also granting European nobility a chance for glory, land, and wealth. While the Crusades were framed as religious wars to protect Christianity and reclaim the Holy Land, they were often marred by violence, pillaging, and brutality. The First Crusade culminated in the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, but the subsequent Crusades failed to maintain control over the city, with the Muslims recapturing it and other territories. The wars also spread far beyond the Holy Land, as the papacy initiated campaigns in Spain, the Baltic, and even against heretics within Europe itself, such as the Albigensian Crusade in southern France. The papacy's increasing involvement in these military ventures deepened the Church's entanglement in secular politics and violence. The consequences of the Crusades were far-reaching, especially in terms of Christian-Muslim relations. The long-lasting enmity between the two faiths was exacerbated by these wars, which often involved massacres and atrocities committed by both sides. The Crusades created a narrative of religious rivalry and hostility that would persist for centuries, shaping the relationship between the Christian and Muslim worlds. While there were moments of peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange, such as the transfer of knowledge and trade between East and West, the Crusades solidified the view of Muslims as the other, leading to a deepening cultural and religious divide. The legacy of the Crusades also had a profound impact on the papacy. While the popes gained short-term prestige and influence by mobilizing Christians for these wars, the long-term effects were less positive. The failure to permanently reclaim Jerusalem and the shifting focus of the papacy toward internal European matters weakened its authority in the face of emerging monarchies. Additionally, the Crusades led to the rise of military orders, such as the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, which further complicated the relationship between the papacy and secular power. The trauma and consequences of the Crusades, both for Christianity and the Muslim world, remain a significant part of the historical narrative, influencing perceptions of religion, warfare, and diplomacy to this day. The Vatican's secret archives are a place of both fascination and intrigue, holding centuries of documents that are essential to understanding not only the Church's history, but also the broader history of Europe and the world. Despite its name, the archives are not a repository of forbidden knowledge, but a vast collection of papal correspondence, decrees, manuscripts, and other records that stretch back over a millennium. The archives cover an extraordinary range of subjects, from the workings of the papacy to political dealings with monarchs and emperors, to the Church's role in historical events. However, the mystery that surrounds these documents lies in their sheer volume, the secrecy with which they are kept, and the rumors that persist about the contents within. Over the years, the Vatican has been accused of withholding critical documents from public view, leading to suspicions about what might be hidden in its vast vaults. Some suggest that the archives contain evidence that could rewrite key moments in history, from the Church's role during the Holocaust to its dealings with various world powers. The secrecy surrounding the archives only fuels such speculation, creating a sense that the Vatican is deliberately keeping certain historical truths out of the public domain. Although a vast portion of the archives is available to researchers, access to the most sensitive and controversial documents is strictly controlled. Only those with specific permission from the Vatican can delve into the most restricted parts of the archives, making it a realm of speculation for many historians and conspiracy theorists alike. The controversy surrounding the Vatican's archives reached a new level when Pope Francis made the decision to open more of the documents related to the pontificate of Pius XII, especially regarding his role during World War II and the Holocaust. For decades, the papacy had been criticized for its silence during the atrocities committed by Nazi Germany, and the Vatican's refusal to release relevant documents only deepened the suspicions surrounding Pius XII's actions. In 2020, Pope Francis authorized the opening of the archives for this period, allowing historians unprecedented access to documents that might shed light on the actions of the Vatican during the war. This move was seen as a step toward greater transparency, yet questions remain about the extent of the Church's involvement in wartime diplomacy and its stance on the atrocities that unfolded. The Vatican's secret archives also hold documents that could reveal the Church's historical stance on issues like heresy, papal infallibility, and its relationship with various sects, orders, and monarchs. One particularly intriguing aspect of the archives is the collection of documents from the Inquisition, a period of religious and political persecution that remains controversial to this day. Scholars have long debated the extent to which the Vatican knew about the Inquisitors' actions and whether the Church endorsed or turned a blind eye to the cruelty and suppression carried out in its name. While the Vatican claims that the archives are a vital resource for understanding the Church's history, the lack of full access raises concerns about transparency and accountability. As access to these documents continues to be debated, the secrecy surrounding the Vatican's archives persists, adding to the mystique and allure of one of the world's most powerful institutions. What remains hidden in the depths of these archives could hold the key to understanding the full scope of the Vatican's role in world history, and it is this mystery that continues to captivate those who seek the truth. The connection between the papacy and secret societies like the Illuminati has long been a subject of intrigue and speculation. Conspiracy theories have woven a complex narrative, suggesting that the Vatican, as one of the most powerful religious institutions in the world, is intricately linked with shadowy groups that operate behind the scenes, manipulating global events for their own gain. Among these, the Illuminati is the most prominent, often depicted as a secretive organization with an agenda to control world affairs, from politics to economics. Theories suggesting papal involvement in such plots have been fueled by the Vatican's long history of influence over European, and by extension, world affairs. The Illuminati itself was founded in 1776 in Bavaria by Adam Weishaupt, a professor of law. Its original aim was to promote Enlightenment ideals, reason, secularism, and individual rights at a time when monarchies and the Catholic Church held considerable power over society. Although the Illuminati was short-lived, officially disbanded by the Bavarian government in 1785, the idea of a secret society with global ambitions persisted in the collective imagination. Over time, the Illuminati became a symbol of hidden control and manipulation, often linked to other secret organizations like the Freemasons. In the eyes of conspiracy theorists, these groups were thought to operate in the shadows, quietly influencing political leaders, corporations, and governments worldwide. The notion that the papacy is involved with such organizations stems from a belief that the Vatican, as an institution that once wielded vast temporal power, seeks to maintain control over global events through covert means. Theories about papal involvement suggest that the Vatican may have secretly aligned itself with the Illuminati or similar secret societies to protect its interests, ensuring the continuity of its influence across the globe. Some argue that the Vatican's historical control over vast amounts of land, wealth, and political influence made it susceptible to manipulation by organizations with similar global ambitions. The relationship between the Church and the Illuminati, however, remains speculative at best. While the Vatican has historically sought to suppress groups and ideologies that challenged its authority, including Freemasonry, which was condemned by multiple papal decrees, there is no concrete evidence linking the papacy directly to the Illuminati or other secret societies. In fact, the Illuminati, in its original form, was antithetical to the values of the Church, advocating for a secular society free from religious influence. The papacy's strict opposition to such movements would seem to contradict any theory of collaboration. Nonetheless, conspiracy theories persist, fueled by the Vatican's secretive nature and its central role in global events. The lack of transparency surrounding its finances, politics, and historical records has led to further speculation that the papacy might be part of a broader network of elite powers working behind the scenes to shape world events. Some have even pointed to certain historical events, such as the rise of fascist regimes in Europe or the Vatican's dealings with powerful political figures, as evidence of a hidden agenda. In reality, the alleged connection between the papacy and the Illuminati remains more rooted in fiction than fact. The Illuminati, as originally conceived, no longer exists in any significant form, and while secret societies undoubtedly have a presence in the world, their influence is often exaggerated in popular culture. Still, the intrigue surrounding the Vatican's role in global affairs persists, with its vast history and global influence continuing to fuel the imagination of those who seek hidden forces at work in the world. The relationship between the Vatican and organized crime is a topic that has long been shrouded in mystery, fueled by rumors and allegations that intertwine the spiritual authority of the Church with the ruthless world of Italy's criminal underworld. While many of these connections remain speculative, there are undeniable historical events and figures that suggest a complex and sometimes controversial interaction between the Vatican and the mafia, particularly in the 20th century. The Vatican's role in Italy's criminal landscape dates back to the post-World War II era, when Italy was grappling with political instability, economic hardship, and the lingering effects of fascism. During this time, the mafia, specifically the Sicilian Cosa Nostra, was consolidating its power, not just in Sicily, but across mainland Italy as well. The Church, while spiritually leading millions, was often seen as a stabilizing force in a country struggling to define itself in the aftermath of the war. However, the Vatican's financial dealings, its complex network of international interests, and its long-standing involvement in Italian politics created an environment where organized crime could flourish. One of the most notorious figures in this relationship was Michele Sindona, an Italian banker with deep connections to both the Vatican and the mafia. Sindona, who was heavily involved in laundering money for the mafia, became one of the Vatican's financial advisors in the 1970s, advising on the management of the Vatican's vast wealth. His role in the Vatican's financial affairs would come under scrutiny when he was linked to fraudulent banking schemes and was later implicated in the mysterious death of Pope John Paul I in 1978. Allegations persist that Sindona used his position to manipulate the Vatican's finances, benefiting from the Church's vast resources, while simultaneously fostering ties to the mafia. Another figure who has been linked to the Vatican-mafia relationship is Cardinal Marcinkus, who was the head of the Vatican Bank during the 1970s and 1980s. The Vatican Bank, under Marcinkus's leadership, became embroiled in the infamous Banco Ambrosiano scandal, where billions of dollars disappeared and a web of mafia ties, money laundering, and financial corruption was uncovered. The collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, one of Italy's largest private banks, was a significant blow to the Vatican's financial reputation. Many speculated that the mafia was deeply involved in the bank's operations, using it as a front for money laundering, while the Vatican turned a blind eye to the activities taking place within its financial institutions. The mafia's political influence also extended to the papal succession, with claims that mafia figures had significant sway in the election of certain popes. While this remains an area rife with conjecture, it is not uncommon for conspiracy theories to arise in relation to the papal conclaves, given the secrecy and high stakes involved in selecting the leader of the Catholic Church. Some have suggested that the mafia played a role in guiding the election of certain popes, leveraging their influence in exchange for favorable treatment regarding church finances or political maneuvering. In Italy, where the mafia historically thrived, the Vatican's influence extended beyond the religious realm. The Church often found itself caught between maintaining its moral authority and aligning itself with political realities. In this volatile environment, the Vatican's interactions with the mafia were not always overt, but rather embedded in the complex web of Italian politics, financial dealings, and the Church's need for protection and stability. The mafia, for its part, saw the Vatican as a powerful ally, one that could offer protection, legitimacy, and even money in exchange for influence. Though the Vatican has long denied any direct involvement with organized crime, these scandals and connections have left a lasting stain on the Church's reputation. The Church's historical ties to the mafia are a reminder of the complex and often controversial nature of its relationship with power, both religious and secular. Despite the ongoing efforts to distance itself from these associations, the legacy of the Vatican's entanglements with Italy's criminal underworld continues to be a subject of intrigue, fueling debates about the true extent of the Church's involvement in global affairs. Pope John Paul II, born Karol Józef Wojtyła in 1920, ascended to the papacy in 1978, becoming the first non-Italian pope in over 450 years. His election marked the beginning of a transformative era for both the Catholic Church and the world. His life and legacy are a testament to resilience, courage, and a deep commitment to the ideals of human dignity, peace, and freedom. A Polish priest who had experienced the horrors of World War II, communism, and Nazi occupation, John Paul II's understanding of oppression shaped his papacy in ways that would influence global politics, religion, and social movements for decades. Pope John Paul II's global influence extended far beyond the spiritual realm. In his early papacy, the world was deeply divided by the Cold War, and much of Eastern Europe was under the heavy grip of communism. John Paul II's deep-rooted opposition to communism and his steadfast belief in human rights and the dignity of the individual were central to his papal mission. His pivotal role in the fall of communism, particularly in his home country of Poland, cannot be overstated. In 1979, during his visit to Poland, John Paul II delivered an impassioned message of hope, inspiring millions of Poles to resist the oppressive regime. His message resonated deeply, and the impact of his words spurred the formation of the Solidarity movement, led by Lech Wałęsa. Solidarity, a labor union and political movement, became the first independent trade union in a Soviet bloc country and played a key role in the eventual downfall of communism in Eastern Europe. The Pope's support for the Solidarity movement was not limited to words. The Vatican's role under his leadership provided a moral and spiritual foundation for resistance against communist oppression. His papacy gave the Polish people the courage to confront the authoritarian regime. The regime, weakened by the moral force of the Church and the growing political movements within Poland, found itself in an increasingly untenable position. John Paul II's influence on the global stage was pivotal in bringing about the eventual collapse of communism, starting with the peaceful revolution in Poland that spread across the rest of Eastern Europe. Many historians point to the Pope's papacy as one of the critical factors in hastening the end of the Soviet Union and the downfall of communism in Europe, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Beyond his political influence, Pope John Paul II also made profound contributions to the Catholic Church and its relationship with other religious communities. He was the first pope to visit a synagogue and a mosque, marking a significant step in interfaith dialogue. His commitment to ecumenism and reconciliation was evident in his efforts to improve relations with Judaism, Islam, and other Christian denominations. His apology for the Church's role in historical injustices such as the Inquisition and the treatment of Jews, was groundbreaking and exemplified his desire to heal the wounds of the past. John Paul II's social teachings emphasized the sanctity of life, the importance of family, and the need for justice and peace in the world. His papacy was marked by efforts to confront modern issues such as poverty, human rights abuses, and the sanctity of life in the face of abortion and euthanasia. His outspoken stance on these matters left an indelible mark on the Church's moral authority, especially in the latter half of the 20th century. Pope John Paul II's legacy continues to influence both the Church and the world. His leadership in the fall of communism, his commitment to interfaith dialogue, and his emphasis on the dignity of the human person remain key components of his papacy. His impact on the Catholic Church and global politics was profound, reshaping the course of history and leaving a lasting mark on the modern world. The election of a new pope is one of the most sacred and secretive processes within the Catholic Church. Steeped in tradition and mystery, the process begins after the death or resignation of a pope, with the College of Cardinals, the highest-ranking clerics in the Church, gathering to select a new leader. This momentous task is carried out in a highly structured environment, with all eyes on the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City, where the conclave takes place. The word conclave itself comes from the Latin cum clave, meaning with a key, reflecting the isolation of the cardinals during the election. Once the cardinals are locked inside the chapel, no one is allowed to enter or leave until the election is decided. The history of papal elections dates back to the early Church, with changes occurring over centuries. Originally, the election of the Pope was a somewhat chaotic process, with local bishops and clergy playing prominent roles. However, as the papacy grew in political and spiritual significance, the process became more formalized. By the 13th century, the election of the Pope had shifted to the College of Cardinals, and the practice of locking them away in the conclave became standard to prevent external influence and ensure that the cardinals could freely debate and vote without outside interference. The election itself is marked by a series of secret ballots, each one held in strict confidentiality. Only cardinals who are under the age of 80 are eligible to vote, and they must reach a 2/3 majority in order to elect a new pope. Each cardinal writes down the name of their chosen candidate on a slip of paper, which is then placed in a chalice. Once all the ballots are cast, the results are counted, and if a candidate receives the necessary votes, the election is considered complete. If no candidate reaches the required majority after several rounds of voting, the process continues until a pope is chosen. One of the most famous symbols of the conclave is the smoke that rises from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Black smoke signifies that no decision has been reached, while white smoke indicates that a new pope has been elected. The sound of bells ringing across Vatican City follows the appearance of white smoke, signaling the Church and the world that the conclave has concluded successfully. The newly elected pope is then presented to the public from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, where he addresses the faithful for the first time as the leader of the Catholic Church. Behind the secrecy and the formal process, however, lies a complex world of politics and maneuvering. The selection of a pope is not solely based on spirituality or holiness, but is influenced by a range of political factors, both within the Church and in the broader world. Cardinals often align themselves with factions based on geographical origin, theological preferences, and visions for the future of the Church. Some cardinals may support candidates who promise reform, while others may back traditionalists who prioritize maintaining the status quo. The role of papal diplomacy, church reforms, and the Church's position in world politics all come into play, making papal elections as much about strategy as about faith. As the conclave unfolds behind closed doors, the outcomes are often shaped by subtle negotiations, alliances, and compromises that determine the course of the Catholic Church for years to come. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, IOR, has long been at the center of controversy due to its secretive nature and complex financial dealings. Established in 1942 by Pope Pius XII, its initial purpose was to manage the Church's finances and support religious and charitable activities worldwide. Despite its mission to serve the Church, the Vatican Bank has been the subject of numerous scandals, its operations often shrouded in mystery, leading to questions about transparency and accountability within one of the world's smallest but wealthiest institutions. Over the years, the Vatican Bank has been involved in a series of financial scandals that have tainted its reputation. Perhaps the most infamous scandal occurred in the 1980s, when the bank was implicated in the collapse of the Banco Ambrosiano, one of Italy's largest private banks. The scandal revolved around the fraudulent activities of Roberto Calvi, the bank's president, who was found dead in London in 1982, in what many believe was a murder tied to the bank's financial mismanagement. The Vatican Bank was linked to the scandal due to its substantial involvement with Ambrosiano, and although the bank's leadership denied any wrongdoing, the incident left a stain on the bank's image and raised questions about its financial practices. In addition to the Banco Ambrosiano scandal, the Vatican Bank has been linked to various other controversies involving money laundering, illegal transactions, and financial opacity. For decades, the IOR was accused of operating without sufficient oversight, making it difficult for outsiders to understand how its vast resources were managed. The Vatican's reluctance to open its financial books to scrutiny has fueled speculation and conspiracy theories about the extent of its hidden dealings. While the Vatican has often defended the bank's activities as necessary to protect its wealth and assets, critics argue that the secrecy surrounding its operations raises doubts about its ethical practices. The Vatican Bank's relationship with international financial institutions has also been a source of tension. Over the years, the IOR has faced pressure from global regulators to comply with international banking standards, particularly regarding anti-money laundering laws. In the 2010s, the Vatican took steps to improve its financial transparency, seeking to align the IOR's operations with international standards. This included the appointment of a financial watchdog and efforts to comply with the European Union's anti-money laundering regulations. However, critics argue that true reform has been slow, and the Vatican Bank continues to face challenges in proving its commitment to transparency. Despite the controversies, the Vatican Bank remains a key player in the Church's global financial operations, managing significant assets that fund religious, charitable, and humanitarian projects worldwide. Its financial dealings, while often clouded in secrecy, are central to the Vatican's ability to maintain its influence and fulfill its mission. Yet, the ongoing scandals and calls for greater accountability continue to cast a shadow over the institution. As the Vatican seeks to reform its financial practices, the question of whether the bank can fully shed its controversial past remains unanswered. Pope Francis, elected in 2013, marked a new chapter in the history of the papacy with his reformist approach and emphasis on social justice, inclusivity, and compassion. As the first pope from the Americas and the first Jesuit pope, his election was seen as a departure from the traditional papal mold, reflecting a desire for a more humble and accessible church. His papacy was quickly defined by a focus on issues such as poverty, climate change, and the plight of refugees, signaling his commitment to modernizing the Catholic Church's engagement with the world. One of Pope Francis's most significant actions was his unwavering stance on social justice. He consistently advocated for the marginalized, including the poor, the homeless, and the dispossessed, aligning the Church with a more progressive, inclusive stance on societal issues. His calls for economic justice, particularly for those in the developing world, were underscored by his criticisms of economic inequality and the global financial systems that often exploit the vulnerable. He reminded the faithful that the Church's mission was to serve those in need and stand in opposition to systems that perpetuate injustice and inequality. Pope Francis's papacy also saw a marked shift in the Church's approach to climate change. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si called on both Catholics and all people of goodwill to address the environmental crisis. His plea for environmental stewardship emphasized the interconnectedness of humanity and the earth and warned against the exploitation of natural resources that harms both creation and future generations. This encyclical also framed climate change as not just an environmental issue but a moral one, particularly affecting the poorest populations who suffer the most from its consequences. By positioning the Catholic Church at the forefront of the environmental movement, Pope Francis aimed to reshape Catholic social teaching in a way that responded to modern, global concerns. In addition to social justice and environmental concerns, Pope Francis was particularly vocal about the global refugee crisis. He emphasized the importance of welcoming and assisting refugees and migrants, urging countries to open their borders to those fleeing war, poverty, and persecution. His calls for compassion resonated globally, as he consistently reminded leaders and communities to remember the dignity of human life and the need for solidarity with displaced populations. His actions included visiting refugee camps and speaking out against the rise of nationalism and xenophobia in various parts of the world. However, Pope Francis's attempts at modernization have not been without their challenges. His efforts to reform the Church have faced significant resistance, particularly from conservative factions within the Vatican and the broader Catholic community. His attempts to address issues such as the role of women in the Church, the acceptance of LGBTQ+ individuals, and the divorce and remarriage policy have provoked both support and criticism. In trying to balance tradition with necessary reform, Pope Francis has navigated a complex web of theological, cultural, and institutional challenges, striving to bring the Church into a more open and inclusive dialogue with the modern world while preserving its core teachings. As Pope Francis continues his papacy, his leadership remains a beacon of change for many Catholics, while also serving as a point of contention for those who prefer a more conservative, traditional approach. His legacy is likely to be defined by his willingness to confront pressing global issues with humility, compassion, and a renewed sense of social responsibility. The papacy's response to the sexual abuse scandals that have plagued the Catholic Church in recent decades has been a matter of intense scrutiny, both within the Church and in the wider public eye. These scandals, which have affected thousands of children and young people globally, began to surface in the late 20th century, but have been ongoing for decades. The revelations of widespread abuse by priests and the subsequent cover-ups by Church officials have deeply damaged the Church's moral authority and its standing in the eyes of many faithful. The Vatican's initial response to the scandals was slow and at times inadequate. For years, many Church leaders, including those in Rome, failed to fully acknowledge the extent of the abuse and in some cases attempted to protect the abusers or downplay the severity of the allegations. This led to a growing sense of anger and betrayal among victims, their families, and the general public. It also resulted in an erosion of trust in the institution, which had long been regarded as a moral authority. Many critics argued that the Church prioritized its reputation and institutional power over the safety and well-being of vulnerable individuals. Under the leadership of Pope Benedict XVI and later Pope Francis, the Vatican made efforts to address the crisis more comprehensively. Pope Benedict, during his papacy, acknowledged the magnitude of the abuse scandal and took steps to remove some of the offending priests and bishops from their positions. He also met with victims and apologized for the pain caused by the Church's failures. However, his efforts were criticized for not going far enough in addressing the systemic issues that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. Pope Francis, who succeeded Benedict in 2013, has made addressing the sexual abuse crisis a central part of his papacy, repeatedly condemning the abuse and promising reforms. He set up commissions and initiatives to investigate abuse cases and ensure justice for the victims. In 2019, he convened a summit at the Vatican with bishops from around the world to discuss ways of combating sexual abuse within the Church. One of his most notable actions was the establishment of a new Vatican law requiring bishops to report abuse cases to civil authorities and the creation of a tribunal to judge bishops accused of mishandling abuse cases. Despite these actions, the Church's response has continued to be viewed as inconsistent and insufficient by many victims and critics. The handling of abuse cases by individual dioceses still varies widely across the world, with some continuing to protect the accused or fail to report allegations to the proper authorities. The Church has also faced criticism for its financial compensation offers to victims, which many feel have been inadequate. The scandals have had a profound impact on the papacy's reputation. The Church, once regarded as a bastion of moral integrity, has seen its credibility shattered. Many Catholics have left the Church, disillusioned by the failure of its leadership to properly address the abuse. Others have turned to the media and the courts, demanding justice for victims and holding Church leaders accountable. The damage to the papacy's reputation has been extensive, and the scandals have led to a widespread reassessment of the Church's moral authority. In response, the Vatican has worked to regain some of its credibility by being more transparent in its dealings with abuse cases and showing a commitment to holding perpetrators accountable. However, for many, the scars left by the scandals will take years, if not generations, to heal. The Church's future depends on whether it can truly confront the legacy of abuse and restore the trust of its followers. During the Middle Ages, the papacy held immense power, not only as the spiritual leader of the Christian world, but also as a dominant political force. The Pope's authority extended far beyond the walls of the Vatican, influencing the course of European history and shaping the political landscape of the time. This period, spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, saw the papacy's role evolve from a spiritual leader of the Church to a powerful political entity with the ability to challenge kings, shape empires, and control vast territories. At the heart of the papacy's power was its claim to be the supreme spiritual authority over all Christians. The Pope was regarded as God's representative on earth, and his authority extended to matters of faith, morals, and the administration of the Church. However, this religious power was intricately intertwined with political influence. The Pope wielded significant influence over European monarchs and rulers, often using his spiritual authority to dictate the terms of alliances, military campaigns, and territorial boundaries. The notion of the divine right of kings was often linked to the papacy, with monarchs seeking papal approval for their rule and legitimacy. One of the most significant expressions of papal power in the Middle Ages was its influence on the Holy Roman Empire. The relationship between the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor was complex and often contentious. The papacy had the ability to crown emperors, providing them with divine legitimacy. This power to crown an emperor gave the Pope considerable leverage, as rulers often sought papal approval to solidify their rule. In turn, popes used their position to shape the direction of European politics, pushing for reforms, declaring wars, and even excommunicating emperors when they defied papal authority. The most notable example of this was the investiture controversy of the 11th century, in which Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV clashed over who held the authority to appoint bishops. This power struggle between the papacy and the monarchy marked a defining moment in medieval Europe and underscored the Pope's political authority. The papacy also played a critical role in the development of European law, governance. The Church's canon law became the foundation for much of Europe's legal systems, and the papacy's ability to mediate disputes between kings and nobles gave it unparalleled influence. Popes acted as arbiters in political matters, with the ability to settle conflicts, impose taxes, and even declare wars. The papacy's control over large swaths of land, particularly the Papal States in Italy, further solidified its power, making the Pope not only a spiritual leader but also a ruler of vast territories. The papacy's influence was not without its challenges. Throughout the Middle Ages, popes had to navigate internal conflicts within the Church, power struggles with monarchs, and external threats from invading forces. The Crusades, initiated by the papacy in the 11th century, exemplified the papacy's ability to unite Christian Europe in pursuit of a common cause. But they also revealed the limitations of papal power when faced with military and political realities. Despite these challenges, the papacy's role in shaping European history during the Middle Ages cannot be overstated. Through its spiritual, political, and territorial influence, the papacy helped define the course of European history, laying the groundwork for the modern world. The relationship between the papacy and the European monarchs was one of intricate power dynamics, often teetering between cooperation and conflict. For much of the Middle Ages, the papacy was not merely a religious institution, but also a powerful political force, wielding influence over kings, emperors, and entire nations. Popes played a crucial role in the rise and fall of European monarchs, using their spiritual authority to legitimize rulers or to challenge their authority when they stepped out of line. This delicate balance of power formed the backdrop for much of the political maneuvering behind the scenes in medieval Europe. The papacy's influence on European kings was most clearly evident in the act of coronation. The Pope held the power to crown kings and emperors, a privilege that granted divine legitimacy to their rule. This coronation was seen as a sacred act, confirming the king's right to rule by divine will. As a result, monarchs sought the Pope's favour to secure their reign. This relationship was not just one of gratitude, however, but of negotiation. Kings often found themselves at the mercy of the papacy, as the Pope could withdraw his approval or excommunicate them, a move that could strip them of their legitimacy and support. In this way, the papacy held an undeniable sway over the political landscape of Europe. However, the papacy's power was not absolute, and kings did not always acquiesce to papal authority. The investiture controversy of the 11th century is one of the most notable examples of the tension between papal power and royal authority. This conflict arose over the appointment of bishops, with Pope Gregory VII asserting the Church's exclusive right to appoint clergy, while Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV argued for his right to invest bishops with authority. The resulting clash led to a dramatic power struggle, with Henry IV eventually submitting to the Pope's authority in one of the most symbolic moments in medieval history, the Emperor's penitent walk to Canossa. Yet, the resolution of this conflict did not settle the larger tension between papal and royal power. The relationship between the papacy and monarchs would continue to be one of delicate negotiation, with each side vying for dominance. In addition to coronations, popes also had a hand in shaping the political futures of monarchs through their role in diplomacy and warfare. Popes often acted as mediators in disputes between kings, and their endorsement could determine the success of military campaigns. For example, popes played a significant role in the Crusades, rallying Christian monarchs to take up arms in the name of religion. In times of war, a pope's blessing could turn the tide in favour of a king, while a papal interdict or excommunication could weaken a monarch's hold on power. This political manoeuvring extended to alliances, where popes would align with one monarch or another based on both religious and geopolitical considerations. The papacy also influenced the downfall of kings when they overstepped their bounds or ignored papal authority. Excommunication, the most powerful tool in the papal arsenal, was often used to remove a monarch from the moral and political landscape. Once excommunicated, a king's legitimacy was questioned, and his subjects were no longer bound by their allegiance to him. This tactic was used strategically to curb royal ambitions and assert the Church's authority over temporal rulers. Behind the scenes, the papacy engaged in complex political maneuvering, using its influence over the Christian world to shape the destinies of monarchs. Popes used diplomacy, alliances, and sometimes military action to maintain and extend their power. Their role in the rise and fall of kings was as much about maintaining control over the political and religious order as it was about asserting the supremacy of the Church in matters of both faith and governance. This intricate dance between the papacy and monarchs marked the political landscape of medieval Europe, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked a monumental moment in both the political and religious history of Europe. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had been a bulwark against the advancing forces of the Muslim world. Yet, its eventual collapse reverberated throughout Christendom, deeply affecting the papacy and the Catholic Church. The papacy's role in the events leading up to the fall of Constantinople is entwined with the complex and often contentious relationship between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, as well as the political struggles of the time. In the years leading up to the fall of Constantinople, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church were locked in a bitter rivalry. The Great Schism of 1054 had split Christianity into two branches, with the Catholic Church in Rome asserting papal supremacy and the Eastern Orthodox Church based in Constantinople maintaining its independence and rejecting the authority of the Pope. This theological and political divide created a chasm between the two branches of Christianity, weakening their ability to present a united front in the face of external threats. Despite this division, Pope Eugenius IV attempted to broker a union between the two churches in the mid-15th century in an effort to strengthen Christendom against the growing Ottoman Empire. The Catholic Church saw the Ottoman threat as a critical issue and sought to unite the Christian world in the face of the Muslim advance. The Council of Florence in 1439 brought together Catholic and Orthodox leaders in an attempt to reconcile their differences and form an alliance against the Ottomans. While some Orthodox leaders, including Emperor John VIII Palaiologos, were open to the idea of reunion for political and military reasons, the vast majority of the Orthodox clergy and people were adamantly opposed. The papacy's efforts to heal the rift between East and West ultimately failed, with the Orthodox Church rejecting papal authority and the union collapsing under the weight of centuries-old theological and political animosities. By the time the Ottoman forces, led by Sultan Mehmed II, laid siege to Constantinople in 1453, the Byzantine Empire was already in a state of decline, its political and military power significantly diminished. The papacy's failure to achieve a lasting union between the Catholic and Orthodox churches left the Eastern Empire isolated, unable to garner the support it needed from the West. Pope Nicholas V had offered support to the defenders of Constantinople, but the Catholic Church's limited influence in the East meant that the assistance it provided was inadequate in the face of the Ottoman onslaught. Additionally, many Western European powers, despite the papacy's calls for action, were preoccupied with their own concerns, and they did little to aid the besieged Byzantines. The fall of Constantinople had profound political and religious implications for both the Catholic Church and the Orthodox world. The Byzantine Empire, which had once been a pillar of Christianity, fell to the Ottomans, marking the end of Christian dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean. The papacy, which had sought to unite Christendom, was left to grapple with the political fallout of the loss of one of its most important Eastern Christian allies. For the Eastern Orthodox Church, the fall of Constantinople symbolized the triumph of Islam and the loss of the spiritual heart of orthodoxy. The Byzantine Empire's religious and cultural legacy was subsumed by the Ottomans, who imposed Islam as the dominant faith in the region. In the aftermath of the fall, the papacy faced new challenges. The Ottoman Empire, now in control of Constantinople, presented a direct threat to Catholic Europe. The Catholic Church, having failed to preserve the Byzantine Empire, would find itself once again embroiled in the fight for Christendom's survival in the face of Islamic expansion. The religious and political consequences of the fall of Constantinople would reverberate for centuries, reshaping the papacy's role in Europe and the broader world. The struggle between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and between Christianity and Islam, would continue to define European history for generations. The Renaissance marked a period of unprecedented cultural flourishing, and the Vatican played a central role in shaping this transformative era. Popes, as both spiritual leaders and powerful political figures, harnessed their influence to become patrons of the arts, architecture, and intellectual endeavors. The Vatican became a hub of creativity, attracting the finest artists, thinkers, and scholars who sought the support of the Church to bring their ideas to life. The papacy's involvement in the Renaissance was not merely about commissioning grand works, it was about shaping the very direction of European culture. During this period, the popes viewed their patronage as both a divine and secular responsibility. Their support of the arts served as a reflection of the glory of God, while also enhancing the prestige and power of the papacy itself. The most notable example of papal patronage came with the commissioning of some of the Renaissance's most iconic masterpieces. Popes like Julius II, Leo X, and Clement VII recognized the ability of art to convey divine messages and assert the Church's authority. The Sistine Chapel's ceiling, painted by Michelangelo, stands as a monumental achievement not only of art but also of papal ambition. The chapel, commissioned by Pope Sixtus IV and later adorned with Michelangelo's frescoes, became the focal point of papal power and spiritual influence, drawing attention to both the divine and human aspects of the Church. The Vatican's support of the arts extended beyond painting and sculpture. Architecture, too, flourished under papal patronage, with St. Peter's Basilica emerging as one of the Renaissance's crowning achievements. Pope Julius II's decision to rebuild St. Peter's, the spiritual centre of Catholicism, led to the construction of a basilica that would later symbolize the power and grandeur of the papacy. Architects like Bramante, Michelangelo, and Maderno contributed to its design, which combined classical elements with Renaissance innovations. The completion of St. Peter's Basilica not only marked a triumph for the Church, but also embodied the papacy's role in guiding the cultural and intellectual development of the time. In addition to art and architecture, the papacy's impact on literature and science during the Renaissance was equally profound. The Vatican became a patron of scholars and scientists who sought to reconcile the emerging ideas of the Renaissance with Church doctrine. The humanist movement, which emphasized the value of classical learning and the potential of human achievement, found a supportive audience within the Vatican. Popes like Nicholas V and Leo X were great supporters of humanist scholars and libraries, promoting the study of Greek and Latin texts and encouraging the translation of important works into vernacular languages. The Vatican's sponsorship of humanism not only advanced intellectual thought, but also set the stage for the rise of modern science and philosophy. At the same time, the Vatican's relationship with the scientific revolution was more complex. While the Church was initially supportive of the study of the natural world, tensions arose as certain scientific discoveries, such as those made by Copernicus and Galileo, challenged the traditional views of the cosmos. The papacy's eventual resistance to these ideas highlighted the conflict between the emerging scientific worldview and the theological teachings of the Church. Despite this, the Vatican's contributions to the Renaissance helped lay the foundation for both the flourishing of art and the eventual rise of modern science. In all, the Renaissance papacy marked a golden age for the Vatican, a time when the Church's influence was seen not only in religious matters but in shaping the very fabric of Western civilization. Through its patronage of the arts, architecture, literature, and science, the papacy left an indelible mark on history, ensuring that the Vatican would remain a central force in both spiritual and cultural life for centuries to come. The papacy played a significant role in the European colonial expansion, both directly and indirectly shaping the course of history as the Church became deeply intertwined with the politics of empire. During the Age of Exploration, European powers such as Spain, Portugal, France, and Britain embarked on voyages that led them to the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The papacy's influence was crucial, as the Church provided spiritual justification for the conquest and colonization of distant lands. Through papal bulls and edicts, the Vatican sanctioned the actions of European monarchs, positioning itself as a key player in the spread of Christianity across the globe. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued the papal bull Intercior Terra, which granted Spain and Portugal exclusive rights to colonize the newly discovered lands of the Americas. This document drew a line down the globe, dividing the non-Christian world between the two Iberian kingdoms. The Pope's blessing provided divine authority to European monarchs, bolstering the legitimacy of their colonial ventures and presenting the spread of Christianity as both a moral imperative and a sacred mission. In theory, the Church sought to convert the indigenous populations to Christianity and save their souls, framing colonization as an act of religious and humanitarian duty. The notion of the civilizing mission was thus deeply embedded in the papal endorsement of colonial expansion. However, the relationship between the Church and colonialism was far more complex. While the papacy claimed to act in the interest of spreading Christianity, it simultaneously facilitated the exploitation and subjugation of native peoples. Missionaries often accompanied colonial expeditions, aiming to convert and baptize indigenous populations. At the same time, the Church provided intellectual and theological justification for the exploitation of resources and human labor in the colonies. The Catholic Church's involvement in the colonial enterprise extended beyond religious conversion. It also entailed political and economic control. In many cases, the Church's landholdings in the Americas and other regions gave it significant influence, further entrenching its role in colonial society. The ethical questions surrounding papal involvement in colonialism remain a point of debate and criticism. The impact on indigenous populations was devastating, as colonizers imposed European ways of life while undermining native cultures, traditions, and religions. The forced conversions, land dispossession, and violence committed against native peoples stand in stark contrast to the Church's professed mission of peace and salvation. While some religious leaders, including figures like Bartolomé de las Casas, spoke out against the mistreatment of indigenous populations and advocated for their rights, these voices were often in the minority. The papacy's official stance remained more aligned with the interests of European monarchs, whose power and wealth depended on the success of colonial ventures. The moral contradictions at the heart of papal involvement in colonialism have led to significant historical reckoning. The Vatican's role in colonialism raises questions about the true nature of its mission and the ethical implications of its support for imperialistic practices. In retrospect, the Church's actions during the colonial era have been criticized for prioritizing the expansion of its own influence over the welfare of native peoples. The legacy of this involvement continues to influence the relationship between the Catholic Church and former colonies, where the scars of colonialism remain deeply felt. The Vatican's role during World War II and its relationship with Nazi Germany remains one of the most controversial chapters in the Church's modern history. At the center of this period was Pope Pius XII, whose papacy from 1939 to 1958 saw the Church facing immense moral, political, and theological challenges as the horrors of the war and the Holocaust unfolded. The Vatican's stance during the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime has been heavily debated, with critics accusing the Church of being too silent in the face of atrocities, while others defend its actions as complicated by the constraints of neutrality and political realities. Pope Pius XII assumed the papacy just months before the outbreak of World War II, at a time when European powers were already beginning to align themselves against Nazi Germany. The Vatican, as the sovereign body of the Catholic Church, officially maintained a policy of neutrality during the war. This stance was consistent with the papacy's long-standing tradition of political impartiality, which sought to avoid entangling the Church in the conflicts between states. However, the extent to which this neutrality was a moral failure remains a subject of intense scrutiny. Critics argue that by remaining silent, Pope Pius XII failed to publicly condemn the Nazi regime's actions, especially its systematic persecution of Jews and other marginalized groups. His reluctance to speak out against Hitler's atrocities, some argue, allowed Nazi ideology to spread unchecked and led to greater suffering for millions. Despite maintaining an official stance of neutrality, the Vatican was not entirely passive during the war. In private, Pope Pius XII and the Holy See worked behind the scenes to try to mitigate the effects of Nazi policies on the Church and Catholic communities across Europe. The Vatican provided asylum to some Jews, offering them refuge in religious institutions such as convents and monasteries, and in some cases, individual clergy members risked their lives to protect Jews from Nazi persecution. However, these efforts were limited in scope and were largely carried out on a case-by-case basis. The Vatican's public statements, however, remained sparse, and Pius XII did not condemn the Nazi regime by name. Even as the Holocaust reached its horrifying peak, the Vatican's response to the Nazi regime, especially in relation to the Holocaust, has been one of the most contentious aspects of Pope Pius XII's legacy. While some historians argue that Pius XII's diplomatic actions, including his attempts to negotiate with Nazi officials, were aimed at protecting the Church's position in Europe, others assert that his silence tacitly enabled the continuation of the atrocities. Many Jews and Jewish organizations have criticized the Vatican for not using its moral authority to publicly denounce the mass murder of Jews, Romani people, and other victims of the Nazis. Furthermore, the Pope's role in facilitating negotiations with Nazi diplomats, especially in the years leading up to the war, has led to further questions about his motivations during this time. Post-war investigations and debates have also focused on the broader role of the Church in aiding Nazi war criminals. It is well documented that some Catholic clergy members in both Europe and the Vatican aided the escape of Nazi officers and collaborators after the war, providing them with false identities and facilitating their flight to South America and other regions. The Vatican's involvement in these activities, particularly through organizations like the Ratlines, has cast a shadow over its moral stance during the war. In the years since the war, the Vatican has taken steps to address the criticisms of Pope Pius XII's wartime actions. Several reports, investigations, and posthumous examinations of church archives have sought to shed light on the extent of the papacy's knowledge of Nazi atrocities and its level of involvement or complicity. However, despite ongoing efforts to reassess this history, the question of whether the Vatican, under Pope Pius XII, should have done more to resist the Nazi regime remains an open and painful debate. The Vatican's involvement in the Cold War was marked by a delicate balancing act, navigating the ideological battle between communism and democracy. Throughout this period, the papacy, led by Popes Pius XII, John XXIII, Paul VI, and John Paul II, became an influential player in global diplomacy, utilizing its moral authority to address the political and social conflicts of the time. The Vatican's role was shaped by its commitment to preserving Christian values, supporting human dignity, and opposing the spread of atheistic communism while maintaining its position as a neutral entity in a deeply divided world. Pope Pius XII, during the early years of the Cold War, was a firm critic of communism, aligning with the Western democracies that sought to contain Soviet influence. His papacy saw the Church engaging in various diplomatic efforts, particularly through the Holy See's diplomatic network, to safeguard Catholic communities in Eastern Europe, which were increasingly under communist rule. However, Pius XII also took care not to fully align the Vatican with any particular political bloc, as it was essential for the papacy to maintain its global influence and moral neutrality. The Vatican's efforts were directed at preventing the spread of communist ideologies, while supporting religious freedoms and human rights in the face of oppressive regimes. The papacy's diplomatic involvement in the Cold War intensified with the election of Pope John XXIII in 1958. Pope John, known for his calls for peace and dialogue, sought to foster better relations between the East and the West. His call for peace through justice reflected the Vatican's desire to mediate in the ideological struggle between the superpowers. His most significant contribution was the convening of the Second Vatican Council, 1962-1965, which sought to modernize the Church's teachings and approach to the modern world. The Council embraced ecumenism, encouraging dialogue with both Protestants and Orthodox Christians, and it also shifted the Church's stance on social justice issues, advocating for the rights of the poor and marginalized. This approach was perceived as an attempt to build bridges between competing ideologies, while still maintaining a strong stance against communism. Under Pope Paul VI, the Vatican continued to navigate the turbulent waters of the Cold War, with particular attention to the conflicts in Latin America and Asia. Paul VI's papacy witnessed significant involvement in global diplomacy, particularly in efforts to combat the spread of communism in places like Vietnam and Cuba. The Vatican was deeply concerned about the rise of Marxist governments in Latin America, and while it worked to protect the Church's interests in these regions, it also advocated for social reforms that would address the underlying causes of poverty and inequality, which communism often exploited to gain support. Pope John Paul II, perhaps the most influential pope of the Cold War era, played a pivotal role in the struggle between communism and democracy. His election in 1978 came at a time when Soviet power was at its height, and his personal experience growing up under the Nazi and Soviet occupations of Poland gave him a unique perspective on the dangers of totalitarian regimes. John Paul II's papacy marked a turning point as he became a vocal critic of communist regimes in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland. His support of the Solidarity movement in Poland, which sought to free the country from Soviet influence, was instrumental in inspiring the resistance against the Communist Party. John Paul II's unwavering support for human rights, religious freedom, and democracy made him an essential figure in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. The Vatican's stance on global conflicts and nuclear arms during the Cold War was also one of cautious engagement. Popes during this period consistently called for peace and disarmament, denouncing the arms race and the threat of nuclear war. They emphasized the moral responsibility of world leaders to pursue peaceful solutions and avoid the devastating consequences of nuclear warfare. The Vatican's opposition to nuclear weapons and its calls for global disarmament were central to its diplomacy, which aimed to reduce the tensions that threatened to engulf the world in a catastrophic conflict. Through its moral authority, diplomatic efforts, and commitment to peace, the Vatican played a significant role in the Cold War, navigating the ideological divide and advocating for human rights, religious freedom, and global peace. While the Church was often caught between two opposing superpowers, its consistent message was clear: the pursuit of justice, peace, and dignity for all people must always transcend political ideology. Throughout its history, the The papacy has played a critical role in shaping global religious dynamics, fostering interfaith dialogue, and navigating the complex relationship between the Catholic Church and other world religions. As the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide, the Pope has long served as a central figure in religious diplomacy, striving to promote peace, understanding, and collaboration among diverse faith traditions. This role has evolved significantly over the centuries, particularly in the modern era, as the Vatican has increasingly recognized the importance of engaging with other religions in the pursuit of common humanitarian and spiritual goals. One of the most significant developments in the papacy's approach to interfaith relations occurred during the pontificate of Pope John XXIII. His leadership marked a shift in the Church's attitude toward other religions, as he sought to reconcile Catholicism with the broader Christian world and beyond. The most notable example of this was the convening of the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. Among its key initiatives was the Declaration on the Relationship of the Church to Non-Christian Religions, Nostra Aetate, which affirmed the Church's respect for and dialogue with other faiths, including Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism. This was a landmark moment in the Church's history, as it called for a recognition of shared values and a commitment to understanding and peace. John XXIII's vision of a church open to dialogue with the world's religions would have a lasting impact on the Vatican's approach to interfaith relations. Pope Paul VI continued this work, enhancing the Church's relationships with other Christian denominations and faiths. His papacy saw the first ever papal visit to the Holy Land, where he met with the Patriarch of Constantinople, signaling a renewed effort to heal the rift between the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. His efforts laid the groundwork for ongoing ecumenical dialogue, particularly in the context of shared Christian values and the pursuit of unity among Christians. In his efforts to bridge religious divides, Paul VI also emphasized the importance of religious freedom, calling for a world where individuals could practice their faith without fear of persecution. Pope John Paul II, one of the most influential popes in history, continued the Vatican's interfaith dialogue initiatives and expanded them on a global scale. His visits to countries with significant Muslim populations, such as his pilgrimage to Morocco in 1985, highlighted the Vatican's commitment to fostering relationships with Islam. In 2001, John Paul II's historic visit to a mosque in Damascus was another milestone in Catholic-Muslim relations, symbolizing the Church's dedication to dialogue with other religious traditions. He also played an instrumental role in improving relations with Judaism, particularly after centuries of strained interactions, culminating in the Vatican's formal apology for past anti-Semitic actions during the Second World War. Under Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis, the Vatican has continued to focus on interfaith dialogue and global religious cooperation. Pope Benedict XVI's emphasis on reason and faith led to his calls for greater dialogue between Christianity and Islam, while also seeking to strengthen relationships with other faiths. Pope Francis, known for his emphasis on social justice, has expanded the Vatican's engagement with interfaith efforts, particularly around issues of global poverty, the refugee crisis, and climate change. His approach has been one of inclusivity, as he consistently calls for peace and solidarity among all religious groups in the face of global challenges. The papacy's influence on global spiritual and cultural issues extends far beyond religious dialogue. The Vatican has played a central role in addressing humanitarian concerns, advocating for peace, and guiding moral discourse on issues such as war, poverty, and human rights. Its voice on issues like climate change and global inequality carries immense weight, as it draws from both religious teachings and moral authority to engage with the world's most pressing challenges. Through its continued efforts to foster dialogue, collaboration, and understanding, the papacy remains a key player in the global religious landscape, shaping the course of interfaith relations and contributing to the pursuit of peace. The history of the Crusades, often seen as a series of religious wars, remains one of the most significant and contentious chapters in the story of the papacy. At their core, the Crusades were driven by both spiritual and political motivations. The papacy's involvement in these conflicts, beginning with Pope Urban II's call to arms in 1095, marked a pivotal moment in the relationship between religion, power, and territorial expansion. The Crusades were presented as a sacred mission to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control, but beneath this religious veneer lay deeper political ambitions, both for the papacy and for European monarchs. Urban II's sermon at Clermont, which ignited the First Crusade, framed the conflict as a holy war to liberate Christian lands, offering indulgences and promises of eternal salvation to those who participated. This appeal to religious devotion, however, was also intertwined with the papacy's desire to exert its authority over European rulers and expand its influence in the Mediterranean region. The Crusades were a complex mix of fervent religious belief and strategic political maneuvering. For the popes, the wars served as a means of consolidating their power, both within the Christian world and in their competition with the Byzantine Empire, which was struggling to maintain control of its eastern territories. Pope Urban's call for the Crusades was also a response to the growing threat posed by Muslim empires, which had expanded rapidly since the 7th century, capturing vast territories and threatening the heart of Christendom. The papacy saw the Crusades as an opportunity to unite Christians under one cause, redirecting the violent energies of feudal knights away from internal European conflicts toward a common enemy in the East. The promise of religious glory, coupled with the prospect of wealth and land, mobilized thousands of soldiers and peasants, eager to take part in the papacy's call to arms. Over the centuries, the Crusades continued to evolve, with various popes leading multiple campaigns aimed at defending Christian interests, expanding papal authority, and protecting pilgrimage routes to Jerusalem. The political ramifications of these wars were profound, as the papacy increasingly intertwined itself with the ambitions of European monarchs, who often saw the Crusades as a way to gain prestige, territory, and wealth. The impact of the Crusades on Christian-Muslim relations, however, was far-reaching and fraught with tension. While the papacy sought to reassert Christian dominance, the Muslim world, led by figures like Saladin, responded with resilience and a fierce desire to defend their territories. The religious and cultural divides between the two faiths deepened, leaving a legacy of mistrust and conflict that persists in some regions to this day. The legacy of the Crusades on Christianity and the Muslim world is one of both spiritual significance and enduring division. The Crusades contributed to the growth of papal power in medieval Europe, shaping the political and religious landscape for centuries. The memory of these wars would also become deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of both Christians and Muslims, leaving a complex legacy of both shared history and bitter conflict. For the papacy, the Crusades represented both a moment of unification and a source of controversy. While they were framed as holy wars, the political consequences of the Crusades, including the shifting power dynamics between the papacy and secular rulers, would continue to influence European politics for generations. Despite the eventual failure to secure lasting control of Jerusalem, the Crusades solidified the papacy's role as a central player in the religious and political affairs of Europe, ensuring its influence over the Christian world for centuries to come. The Vatican's role in the two world wars is a story marked by moral dilemmas, political maneuvering, and a delicate balancing act between religious principles and global realities. During World War I, the papacy, under Pope Benedict XV, faced unprecedented challenges as the war plunged Europe into chaos. Despite his calls for peace, the Vatican found itself in a position where its ability to influence the warring nations was limited. Pope Benedict XV was one of the few figures to call for an immediate ceasefire in 1915, condemning the atrocities of the war and calling for reconciliation. His efforts, however, were largely ignored by the major powers, who were consumed by their own nationalistic and imperial interests. The Vatican's neutrality during the conflict was viewed with suspicion by some, as it maintained a delicate stance of non-involvement while advocating for peace. In the aftermath of the war, the Vatican's role was largely overshadowed by the political and economic turmoil that swept through Europe. In the lead-up to World War II, the papacy, now under Pope Pius XI, faced an even more complex and morally fraught situation. The rise of fascism in Italy under Benito Mussolini and the growing threat of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler placed the Vatican in a precarious position. Mussolini's 1929 Lateran Treaty with the Vatican gave the Church its own sovereign territory in the form of Vatican City, securing its independence. But it also aligned the papacy with an authoritarian regime that was becoming increasingly hostile to certain Christian values. Pope Pius XI, deeply concerned about the growing totalitarianism in Europe, issued strong encyclicals condemning fascism, anti-Semitism, and the dangers of state-controlled ideologies. However, his efforts to unite the Christian world against the rising tide of extremism were undermined by the Vatican's own political needs, as it sought to maintain its influence and avoid direct confrontation with the regimes in power. As the war unfolded, the Vatican faced even harsher scrutiny. Under Pope Pius XII, who became Pope just before the outbreak of World War II, the Church's role in global affairs became a matter of heated debate. Pope Pius XII has been both praised and criticized for his actions during the war. On the one hand, the Vatican provided sanctuary to thousands of refugees and played a crucial role in helping to save Jews from Nazi persecution, particularly in Italy. On the other hand, the papacy's failure to speak out more forcefully against the Holocaust and its relatively muted response to Nazi atrocities led to accusations of complicity and moral cowardice. Some argue that Pius XII's reluctance to denounce the Nazi regime publicly was motivated by a desire to protect the Vatican's neutrality and preserve its influence in post-war Europe, while others contend that his discreet diplomatic efforts behind the scenes were aimed at saving as many lives as possible in a time of unprecedented danger. In the wake of the wars, the Vatican's efforts to promote peace and reconciliation gained more visibility. The papacy became a strong advocate for international cooperation, particularly through its support of the United Nations and the promotion of Christian unity in the post-war world. Pope Pius XII's successor, Pope John XXIII, would go on to promote a new vision of peace and cooperation that would be further advanced by the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican's role in negotiating peace during the world wars, though often subtle, was an integral part of the broader Christian moral response to the devastation wrought by global warfare. It reflected the papacy's ongoing commitment to promoting human dignity, justice, and peace, even in the face of overwhelming conflict and political upheavals. Throughout history, the papacy has not only been a beacon of spiritual guidance, but also a center of power, influence, and, at times, scandal. Behind the grandeur of the Vatican and the sacred duties of the Pope, the Church has been plagued by numerous controversies and scandals that have marred its reputation. These dark secrets have often remained hidden, but when they emerged, they sent shockwaves through the Catholic community and the broader world. One of the most notorious scandals to stain the papacy's reputation was the Borgia papacy in the late 15th century. Pope Alexander VI, a member of the Borgia family, is remembered not for his devotion to the Church, but for his blatant manipulation of papal power to further the interests of his family. His papacy was marked by nepotism, bribery, and incestuous relationships with his children, including the infamous Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. becoming symbols of corruption. The Borgia family used their influence to secure political power across Italy, with the Pope himself accused of using his position to enrich his family and advance their ambitions. The legacy of the Borgias has remained a symbol of the potential for abuse of power within the Vatican, casting a shadow over the holiness expected of the papacy. In later centuries, the papacy continued to be tainted by financial corruption, most notably during the Renaissance, when the Church became a major economic power. The sale of indulgences, a practice where people could purchase pardons for their sins, became a significant source of income for the papacy, but it also sparked widespread criticism and laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation. The Church's manipulation of spiritual matters for financial gain alienated many, and the indulgence scandal remains one of the most controversial chapters in the papacy's history. In more recent times, the Church has faced a different kind of scandal, one involving the sexual abuse of minors by clergy members. For decades, allegations of child abuse by priests were either ignored or covered up by church officials. The Vatican's failure to address these issues in a timely and transparent manner has led to deep wounds within the Church and profound disillusionment among the faithful. The scandals erupted publicly in the 1980s and 1990s, but investigations and revelations have continued well into the 21st century. The Church's mishandling of these cases, including the shifting of abusive priests between parishes to conceal their actions, has been seen as a severe betrayal of the trust placed in its clergy. The resulting media coverage and legal battles have irreparably damaged the image of the papacy and caused immense harm to the survivors of abuse, as well as to the broader Catholic community. These scandals have left a lasting impact on the Church. Trust in the Vatican has been eroded, and many have questioned the moral authority of the papacy. Popes have apologized, but the pain remains. The process of reform and accountability within the Church has been slow, and while some progress has been made, the damage to the papacy's credibility persists. As the Church navigates these dark chapters in its history, it must contend with the difficult task of rebuilding trust, addressing the wrongs of the past, and reaffirming its commitment to the values of justice, integrity, and compassion. The scandals surrounding the papacy have been painful reminders that even the holiest institutions are not immune to corruption, and that true renewal requires a reckoning with the past. The Vatican has long been an institution rooted in tradition, a beacon of faith and spiritual authority for millions. However, as the world rapidly advanced, particularly in the realms of science, medicine, and technology, the Church found itself at a crossroads. How could the Vatican reconcile its centuries-old teachings with the ever-evolving landscape of modern progress? The Vatican's response to technological innovation has been cautious, but thoughtful, marked by moments of embrace and moments of skepticism. In the realm of science and medicine, the Vatican's position has often been influenced by its commitment to preserving the sanctity of life and human dignity. The Church has consistently supported scientific advancements that align with its moral teachings, such as breakthroughs in medical research that aim to alleviate suffering or cure diseases. However, the Vatican has also firmly opposed certain practices it views as unethical, such as stem cell research using embryonic cells, euthanasia, and abortion. In these instances, the Church has called for a careful balance between innovation and the protection of human life, warning against advances that might compromise moral values in pursuit of progress. The rise of digital technology and the Internet posed new challenges for the Vatican as it navigated an increasingly connected world. While the Church has historically been cautious about embracing modernity, Pope John Paul II took significant steps to position the Vatican in the digital age. He was the first pope to create an official Vatican website in 1995, recognizing the potential of the Internet to spread the gospel and connect the faithful around the world. Since then, The Vatican has continued to expand its presence on social media, with Pope Francis using platforms like Twitter and Instagram to communicate with millions of followers globally. These efforts reflect the Vatican's awareness of the power of modern technology to reach and engage a vast audience, offering spiritual guidance in real time. Yet, despite these technological strides, the Vatican remains wary of certain aspects of the digital age. The Church has voiced concerns over the ethical implications of artificial intelligence, particularly in areas like surveillance, privacy, and the potential for machines to make life-altering decisions without human oversight. The Vatican has stressed the importance of ensuring that technology serves humanity rather than dehumanizing it. Pope Francis has called for a culture of encounter, urging that technological advancements must prioritize human dignity, social justice, and the common good. The Church's stance on technological progress is a delicate balancing act, one that seeks to integrate innovation without losing sight of its core values. While the Vatican recognizes the necessity of embracing modern advancements, it does so with a firm commitment to ethical principles that guide its teachings. In doing so, the Vatican remains a steadfast guardian of tradition, striving to harmonize faith with the ever-changing tides of modernity, all while ensuring that technology is used in service to humanity's greater good. The Vatican's political influence is often underestimated, yet its power has been felt across centuries of world history. The Holy See, while primarily a spiritual institution, has long wielded significant political clout, often acting as a powerful player on the global stage. This influence has shaped the course of events, both religious and secular, forging connections with kings, emperors, and political leaders that have shaped nations and entire civilizations. At the heart of this political power lies the papacy, a position that, over time, has combined both spiritual authority and temporal influence. During the Middle Ages, the Pope was not only the religious leader of Christendom, but also a political authority, with vast territories under his control. The Papal States, which stretched across central Italy, were a testament to the Vatican's power. The Pope was a sovereign ruler, commanding armies, collecting taxes, and entering into alliances just like any other monarch. Popes like Gregory VII and Innocent III were key figures in asserting the Vatican's power over Europe, influencing the rise and fall of monarchs and wielding power through both ecclesiastical decrees and political maneuvering. The papacy's involvement in European politics was not just limited to territorial control. The Church often acted as an intermediary in political conflicts, facilitating peace between warring factions or brokering alliances. The Church's influence in shaping European monarchies cannot be overstated. Popes were often involved in the coronation of kings, providing religious legitimacy to rulers. In some cases, the papacy even had the power to depose monarchs or excommunicate them, an act that could delegitimize their rule and galvanize opposition. One of the most notable examples of papal political power was the investiture controversy in the 11th century, where Pope Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV clashed over the appointment of bishops. This conflict not only reshaped the relationship between church and state, but also set a precedent for the political authority of the papacy. In modern times, the Vatican's political influence has shifted, especially after the loss of the Papal States in the 19th century. However, the papacy remains a key player in global politics, particularly through its diplomatic relations. The Vatican maintains embassies in nearly every country, making it one of the most globally connected institutions. Popes continue to meet with world leaders, offering counsel on issues ranging from war and peace to poverty and human rights. Pope John Paul II's role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe is perhaps one of the most significant examples of the Vatican's diplomatic influence in the modern era. His support of the Solidarity movement in Poland helped galvanize the resistance against Soviet rule, and his efforts to foster dialogue between the East and West were pivotal in ending the Cold War. The Vatican's relationship with international organizations like the United Nations has also shaped global politics. While it is not a member of the UN, the Vatican holds a unique position as a permanent observer, allowing it to exert influence on issues such as human rights, global peace, and social justice. Its moral authority continues to be a guiding force, with the papacy often acting as a voice for the voiceless, advocating for the marginalized and oppressed across the world. Throughout history, the Vatican has played a delicate balancing act between its spiritual mission and its political power. From the medieval papacy to the modern pontificate, the Vatican's ability to influence world events has been a constant, and it remains a formidable force in the global political arena today. Throughout history, the papacy has often been associated with formal rituals, liturgies, and the visible workings of the Catholic Church. However, beneath the surface of public religious practices, there lies a secret history of mysticism that has quietly shaped the inner workings of the Church. This mystical dimension, though largely concealed from public view, has played a critical role in the papacy's spiritual authority and its governance of the faithful. One of the most intriguing aspects of papal mysticism is the practice of secret rites, some of which have remained closely guarded for centuries. These rituals, often imbued with symbolism and esoteric meaning, were designed to deepen the Pope's spiritual connection with God and enhance his role as the earthly representative of the divine. The inner sanctum of the Vatican, away from the prying eyes of the faithful, became the setting for these sacred ceremonies, where the Pope and select members of the clergy would partake in spiritual exercises that aligned the Church's leadership with a higher, unseen power. Mysticism, in its various forms, has had an enduring presence in papal history. The papacy has long embraced the concept of divine illumination, where the Pope is believed to be guided by spiritual visions or signs that inform his decisions and actions. The Church's canonization process, for instance, often involves a mystic element, with the lives of saints being examined not only for their virtuous deeds, but also for their spiritual experiences and extraordinary connections with the divine. In some cases, these mystical experiences, ranging from visions of angels to encounters with the divine presence, were seen as affirmations of the Pope's authority to lead and protect the Church. Certain hidden aspects of papal mysticism also involve the use of symbols and sacred objects, many of which have been passed down through generations of popes. The Vatican, with its vast archives and secret collections, has preserved relics and texts that delve into the mysteries of faith. Some of these are said to contain knowledge that, if revealed, could alter the way the Church and the world perceive divine intervention and the papal office itself. These ancient texts, often encrypted or written in obscure languages, continue to fascinate scholars and mystics alike, offering tantalizing glimpses into a world of hidden spiritual knowledge. The role of mysticism within the papacy also ties into the concept of papal infallibility, a doctrine that asserts the Pope's authority is divinely protected when speaking ex cathedra on matters of faith and morals. While the doctrine itself is publicly acknowledged, the mystical foundations that undergird it are often kept in the shadows, understood only by those within the highest echelons of the Church. The papacy's infallibility is seen by some as not just a theological concept, but as a mystical bond between the Pope and the divine will, a connection that allows the Pope to act as the earthly conduit for divine truth. Despite the secretive nature of these mystical practices, they have had a profound impact on the papacy and the spiritual life of the Church. While the public face of the Vatican often focuses on its political and doctrinal role, the hidden mystical dimension of the papacy has continued to shape the Church's identity and its understanding of divine authority. The mysticism that has quietly existed behind the scenes speaks to the deeper, the more mysterious forces that guide the papacy and its place in the spiritual and temporal worlds. The fall of the Papal States marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Vatican and the papacy's relationship with political power. For centuries, the papacy held both spiritual and temporal authority over a vast region in central Italy, ruling the Papal States as a sovereign entity. This unique dual role allowed the Pope to wield significant influence not only over matters of faith, but also over political affairs, shaping the course of European history. However, the 19th century brought about a series of events that would erode the papacy's temporal power and ultimately lead to the decline of the Papal States. The process began with the unification of Italy, a movement that sought to consolidate the various independent states on the Italian peninsula into a single nation. As Italy began to emerge as a unified republic, the papacy found itself at odds with the newly formed Italian government. The Pope, who had once been a powerful political figure, became increasingly isolated as Italian forces, under the leadership of figures like Giuseppe Garibaldi, advanced towards Rome. In 1870, the Italian army entered Rome and captured the city, ending centuries of papal rule over the surrounding territories. This marked the formal collapse of the Papal States, and the Pope's direct control over land was diminished, leaving the Vatican itself as the last remaining symbol of papal sovereignty. In response to the loss of the Papal States, the Vatican adapted to its new circumstances. The Pope's temporal authority over Italian territory was no longer a reality, but the spiritual power of the papacy remained unchallenged. However, the Vatican was now in a precarious position, forced to navigate a world in which its authority was no longer tied to political dominion. This shift was deeply felt within the Church, as the papacy had to reconsider its role in an increasingly secular world. The Vatican, while still an influential institution, had to find new ways to maintain its relevance and protect its interests in the absence of direct territorial control. The creation of Vatican City in 1929, following the Lateran Treaty between the Holy See and the Kingdom of Italy, marked a significant moment in the papacy's adaptation to its loss of temporal power. The treaty recognized the Vatican as an independent sovereign entity, ensuring that the Pope retained his spiritual authority, while allowing the Vatican to remain a neutral entity in international politics. Vatican City became a symbol of the Church's spiritual independence, a tiny but powerful enclave in the heart of Rome that preserved the papacy's sovereignty in a world that had grown increasingly hostile to temporal rule. The Vatican's role shifted from one of political dominion to one of spiritual guidance and moral leadership. The papacy embraced its newfound role as a global leader of faith, rather than a ruler of a vast territory. This transition was not without its challenges, as the Church had to navigate the changing political landscape of the 20th century, but it marked a new chapter in the papacy's history, one that allowed the Vatican to continue its mission of guiding the faithful while adapting to the realities of a modern, secular world. The loss of the Papal States, while a significant blow to the papacy's temporal power, ultimately led to the creation of a new, more focused role for the Vatican that would continue to shape its influence in the centuries to come. In the modern age, the Vatican's influence remains profound, even in a world where religion often seems to take a backseat to political and economic power. As a sovereign entity and a spiritual leader for over 1 billion Catholics worldwide, the papacy continues to shape global affairs in ways that transcend national borders. Its impact can be seen not only in the realms of religion, but also in politics, social issues, and international diplomacy. The papacy's role in modern politics is far-reaching, though it no longer commands the temporal power it once held through the Papal States. The Vatican, however, remains a unique player on the world stage, influencing global affairs through its moral authority. Popes today speak out on issues such as poverty, war, climate change, and human rights, often positioning the Vatican as a voice for the voiceless. Whether advocating for peace during times of conflict or calling for international cooperation on issues like refugees and climate change, The papacy uses its unique position to shape global discourse, urging governments and individuals alike to consider their moral responsibilities to others. In the realm of religion, the Vatican's influence is still unmatched, providing spiritual guidance to millions around the globe. The papacy plays a crucial role in shaping Catholic doctrine and guiding the Church through modern challenges. It addresses theological concerns, clarifies moral teachings, and serves as a central figure for unity among Catholic communities. As the leader of one of the largest religious institutions in the world, the Pope wields immense influence over the hearts and minds of the faithful, even in an increasingly secular society. The Vatican also fosters interfaith dialogue, often acting as a bridge between different religions, promoting mutual understanding and respect. Social issues remain a major focus of the Vatican's attention, with the papacy consistently advocating for social justice, economic equality, and human dignity. Pope Francis, in particular, has made a significant mark on this front, prioritizing issues such as the welfare of migrants, the protection of the environment, and the fight against economic inequality. His calls for a more inclusive, compassionate world resonate not only with Catholics, but with people of various faiths and backgrounds. The Vatican's outreach on social issues has helped to place the Church at the forefront of global debates on issues that transcend traditional religious boundaries. Looking ahead, the future of the papacy remains uncertain, shaped by both internal and external challenges. The Vatican faces a changing world where secularism and political instability present new obstacles to its traditional influence. However, the papacy's ability to adapt, engage in diplomacy, and maintain its position as a moral authority suggests that it will continue to play an important role in the 21st century. The Vatican's long-standing commitment to peace, justice, and human dignity ensures that, even in a rapidly evolving world, the papacy will remain a guiding force, shaping the future of global affairs in ways that reflect its deep spiritual mission. The legacy of the popes is a history that stretches back over 2 millennia, and their influence on the course of Western civilization is undeniable. From the earliest days of Christianity, when St. Peter, the first pope, laid the foundation for the Church, to the papacy's present-day role as a global moral authority, the popes have been central figures in shaping not only religious thought, but also the cultural and political landscape of the world. The papacy's influence on Western civilization is profound, particularly in the realms of religion, philosophy, and ethics. The Church has played an integral role in preserving and transmitting knowledge throughout history, especially during times of political and social upheaval. In the Middle Ages, when much of Europe was in a state of fragmentation, the papacy became the central unifying force, both spiritually and politically. Popes wielded considerable power, guiding not only the religious but also the political destinies of European kingdoms. The papal influence was not just in matters of faith, but also in law, art, and governance, setting the course for the cultural and intellectual development of the West. One of the most significant contributions of the papacy has been its role in shaping the moral and ethical foundations of Western society. Popes have consistently spoken out on issues of social justice, human dignity, and the sanctity of life, asserting that these principles are central to human existence. From the early papal encyclicals to more recent documents, the Church has sought to guide humanity in matters of ethics and morality, addressing issues such as poverty, inequality, war, and the protection of the environment. These teachings have left an indelible mark on the conscience of the West, influencing not only religious believers, but also secular thinkers, leaders, and organizations. The cultural legacy of the papacy is equally noteworthy. The Vatican has long been a patron of the arts, commissioning works from some of the world's greatest artists, including Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo da Vinci. The Vatican's art collections, libraries, and archives stand as a testament to its patronage and its commitment to preserving human creativity and intellectual achievement. The Renaissance, in particular, was a period where the papacy's influence reached its zenith, blending religious devotion with artistic and scientific exploration. Through these efforts, the papacy helped cultivate a rich cultural heritage that continues to inspire and inform Western culture today. The popes have also played an essential role in the spiritual development of humanity, guiding billions of Catholics and others in their quest for meaning, hope, and faith. The papacy's emphasis on the importance of prayer, charity, and love for one's neighbour has resonated throughout history, encouraging individuals and communities to strive for higher ideals. Popes have been instrumental in promoting peace, addressing social injustices, and providing comfort during times of crisis. The legacy of the popes is one of enduring significance. Through their spiritual leadership, cultural patronage, and moral guidance, the popes have left an indelible mark on history. Their influence has shaped not only the development of Western civilization, but also the hearts and minds of people around the world, offering a vision of faith, hope, and love that transcends generations. As the papacy continues to evolve, its enduring legacy remains a powerful force in shaping humanity's spiritual and moral development. The future of the papacy lies at a crossroads, with challenges that are both complex and profound. As the world becomes more secular, the role of the Pope faces new questions about its relevance in a society that increasingly prioritizes individual autonomy and materialism. Yet, with these challenges come unprecedented opportunities for the papacy to continue playing a central role in global affairs, especially in the realms of morality, social justice, and peace. In a world that is increasingly defined by political polarization, environmental crises, and social inequality, the papacy has the unique opportunity to be a voice of reason, compassion, and unity. Pope Francis, in particular, has shown a deep commitment to addressing the challenges of climate change, poverty, and the refugee crisis. These global issues are not only moral imperatives but also deeply intertwined with the Catholic Church's teachings on human dignity and stewardship of God's creation. The papacy, with its vast global reach, has the potential to bring attention to these issues in ways that few other institutions can. Yet, the modern papacy also faces a daunting challenge in maintaining its spiritual authority in a world that is becoming increasingly indifferent to organized religion. Secularism, modernity, and the rise of other belief systems pose significant challenges to the Church's traditional role as a moral and spiritual guide. The number of people identifying as religiously unaffiliated continues to rise, especially in the West. In many parts of the world, people are questioning the relevance of religious institutions to their daily lives. As such, the papacy must navigate this changing landscape, adapting to the needs of contemporary society while staying true to its core message of faith, hope, and love. At the same time, the Vatican must address its internal challenges, including the need for greater transparency, accountability, and reform within the Church. The legacy of scandals and accusations, particularly those related to sexual abuse, continues to cast a shadow over the institution. For the papacy to continue to lead effectively, it must show a commitment to justice and healing, ensuring that the Church is a place of safety, trust, and moral integrity. The future of the Catholic Church, and by extension the papacy, will likely see a continued emphasis on the global nature of the Church's mission. As the world becomes more interconnected, the papacy has the potential to serve as a bridge, fostering dialogue between cultures and faiths, and playing a critical role in fostering peace and understanding. The Church's deep history of engagement in global affairs provides it with an opportunity to shape international relations, especially in areas such as interfaith dialogue and human rights. In the years to come, The legacy of the papacy will be defined by its ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world while preserving its core values. As the Church faces these evolving challenges, its role as a moral and spiritual leader will remain crucial in offering guidance and hope to billions of people worldwide. The future of the papacy may look different than its past, but its legacy of compassion, faith, and justice will undoubtedly continue to shape the course of human history for generations to come.